Yo, what's up everyone? It's Eldritch Potter, and today we're checking out, what if baby Harry crawled into Gringotts covered in blood and goblins discovered Dumbledore stole his entire legacy. Drop a like if you're hyped. Subscribe for daily content. Let's get this story started. Chapter 1, The Crawl. The house in Godric's Hollow had been beautiful once. Lily Potter had hung wind chimes by the nursery window, little copper stars that spun and chimed soft notes when the breeze came through. James had complained they kept him up. Lily had laughed and told him they kept the nightmares away. They'd argued about it for 3 weeks, warm bickering arguments that ended in laughter and James pretending to be more annoyed than he was, and eventually he'd stopped complaining because the truth was he'd started to like the sound. The wind chimes were gone now. Everything above the second floor was gone. The house breathed smoke into the cold October sky, orange light guttering in the wreckage of the upper rooms, and the street below was utterly, completely silent. No neighbors. No passing cars. Godric's Hollow had that strange quality of old magical settlements, the kind of silence that wasn't really silence, just the careful arrangement of things that preferred not to be noticed. Nothing noticed the small shape in the rubble. Nothing watched the baby drag himself forward through plaster and charred wood, through dust and broken glass, moving on instinct the way very young creatures move when instinct is all they have. His hands bled where the debris cut them. His forehead bled from the curse scar, a wound shaped like a bolt of lightning that had no business being on something so small, carved there by magic so dark it had stained the air around it. He cried for a while. Then he stopped crying, because crying didn't change anything, and even at 15 months old, some part of Harry Potter understood that the warmth he was crying for wasn't coming back. He crawled forward. The stairs were gone. He went down the side of the house through a gap in the wall that the explosion had made, tumbling the last 3 feet into cold mud and lying still for a moment with the wind knocked out of him. His face pressed against the earth. He could feel something humming through it, deep and rhythmic, like a heartbeat buried too far down to reach. He didn't know what it was. He pushed himself up anyway. The street was dark. Lampposts flickered, responding to something in the air, the after-echo of very powerful magic that hadn't fully dissipated. Harry sat in the middle of the road and looked at the world with the steady, serious expression that Lily had always found slightly unnerving in a child so young, as though he was taking notes. His magic moved under his skin the way it always had, restless and warm. But tonight it was different. Tonight it was pulling. Directional, insistent, tugging him the way a compass needle finds north. He didn't understand it. He followed it anyway because at 15 months old, a compass is more reliable than a plan. He crawled down the lane. Then the next lane. Then through a small gap in a garden wall that he had absolutely no physical business fitting through, and didn't, until his magic did something that rearranged the relationship between the gap and his body and deposited him on the other side in a way that would have made a physicist deeply uncomfortable. It took hours. He stopped twice, once to sleep curled against the base of a stone wall and once because a cat found him and he found the cat and they regarded each other with mutual interest. The cat had the sense to move on. Harry followed his pulling compass. By the time the sky had gone from black to the deep bruised purple that happens just before dawn, he was in Diagon Alley. It was empty this time of night, the shops dark, the cobblestones slick with October damp, the whole street carrying that particular quality of a place that knows it's being seen and prefers it wasn't. Harry crawled past the darkened window of Ollivanders, past the closed face of Flourish and Blots, past the cauldron shop with its display of pewter and brass gleaming dully in the darkness. He left small bloody handprints on the cobblestones. The white marble face of Gringotts Bank rose at the end of the alley like something that had always been there and always would be, indifferent to empires, indifferent to dark lords, indifferent to the entire wet, chaotic business of human history. The torches on either side of the entrance burned without flickering, goblin fire, steadier than anything nature produced. The bronze doors stood closed. Harry sat at the bottom of the steps and looked up at them. The doors were 3 times the height of a grown man, etched with runes that glowed faintly, warning systems woven into the metal itself. The steps were white marble, steep and wide, built for a formal kind of entrance. He grabbed the first step with both hands and pulled himself up. It took him 4 minutes to climb 11 steps, which was both an impressive and an exhausting 4 minutes. He was bleeding on the white marble and his hands kept slipping, and twice he slid back down and had to start again. By the third time he slid back he made a sound that wasn't quite crying and wasn't quite furious and was mostly both, and his magic crackled outward in a brief hot wave that dried the marble in front of him and stopped the slipping. He didn't notice he'd done it. He just climbed. He reached the bronze doors. He looked at them. He put his small, bloody, plaster-dusted hand flat against the surface. The doors opened. Inside Gringotts, at 4 in the morning, there was always business. Goblins didn't keep human hours. They never had. The great hall of the bank was lit by floating spheres of golden light, dozens of teller windows active even at this hour, the constant low industry of one of the most powerful financial institutions in the world going about its work without pause. Ledgers floated at shoulder height, quills scratching. Carts rumbled somewhere below in the tunnels. The air smelled of stone and metal and something old, very old, older than the building, some mineral memory of the mountains that the bank had been carved from. The goblin at the nearest window was named Sharpclaw, and he had worked the early morning shift for 60 years because he preferred it, quieter, more interesting cases, and the humans were always more honest at 4 in the morning because they were too tired to lie well. He was in the middle of a particularly satisfying dispute resolution involving 3 competing wills and a Cornish estate when the front doors opened. He looked up. He looked down. He stared. The baby in the entrance was approximately a year old, possibly slightly more. He was covered in dust, blood, and something that was almost certainly plaster. He had a wound on his forehead in a shape that Sharpclaw, who had lived through the first rise of the Dark Lord and knew what dark magic looked like from the inside, recognized immediately. His eyes were the vivid, impossible green of a potion at the exact moment it turned right. He was looking around the great hall with an expression of cautious, serious interest, and he had left a trail of small bloody handprints across the white marble of the entrance that stretched all the way back through the open doors to the steps outside. Sharpclaw was, in his 60 years at the teller window, essentially unshockable. He came around his counter and crouched down in front of the child. "Well," he said. The baby looked at him with those green eyes. "You're bleeding," Sharpclaw said. The baby reached out and grabbed Sharpclaw's finger with a grip that was, frankly, unreasonable. Sharpclaw's professional instincts had been honed across 6 decades of banking. His first thought was not poor child, and it was not how terrible. His first thought was the thought of a goblin who had grown up understanding that information was the most valuable currency in the world. His first thought was, who is this, what are they owed, and why are they here? He picked the child up carefully. He had not held a child in some years and the mechanics were slightly unfamiliar, but goblins were nothing if not adaptable, and carried him to the nearest desk, where he set him down on the surface and took a long, careful look. The wound on the forehead was active. Still bleeding slightly, still faintly luminescent with the residue of extremely dark magic. Sharpclaw had been born in 1850 and he had seen a great many things, but the sight of that mark on something so small did something complicated to him that he filed away to examine later. "Harrigan," he said. Another goblin materialized from between the desks, younger, sharper-faced, with the particular alert stillness of someone who was paid to notice things. "Sir. Fetch a lineage stone. Primary identification. And bring healer Grimtooth from the lower ward." Harrigan looked at the baby. His eyes went to the forehead. Something shifted in his expression. "Sir, is that, I don't know yet. That's why I want the stone. Go." Harrigan went. Sharpclaw pulled a clean cloth from a desk drawer and pressed it gently against the cut on the baby's forehead, and the baby, who had apparently decided that Sharpclaw was acceptable company, grabbed the cloth with both hands and tried to put it in his mouth. Sharpclaw removed it. The baby tried again. Sharpclaw held it out of reach. "Stop that," he said. The baby gave him an evaluating look. You can be annoyed with me later. Sit still. The baby sat still. Remarkably, actually, sat still in a way that most babies did not. He looked around the hall with that measuring expression, and his eyes tracked the floating ledgers and the scurrying junior staff with the same calm attention he'd probably given the cat in the lane, cataloging everything, disturbing nothing. Healer Grimtooth arrived first, a small, severe goblin woman who took one look at the situation and clicked her tongue at Sharpclaw in a way that communicated, in a very compressed form, that she thought poorly of his methods, his timing, and probably several of his life choices. She did not, however, hesitate. She produced a medical kit from her coat that was significantly larger than the coat should have been able to contain and began examining the baby with brisk, professional efficiency, checking the cut on his forehead, the cuts on his hands, the bruising along his left side from where he'd fallen. He crawled here, Sharpclaw said. Grimtooth looked up. The handprints begin at the door and go down the steps. He crawled. From wherever this happened. He nodded at the scar. Grimtooth looked at the baby. The baby looked at Grimtooth. Something in her severe expression shifted, very slightly, and then she put it back where it was and returned to her examination with redoubled focus. Harrigan returned with the lineage stone. It was a piece of polished grey crystal about the size of a fist, warm to the touch, and it had been used in Gringotts for 4 centuries to do one thing with absolute, incontrovertible, magically binding accuracy: identify who you were and what you were owed. No charm could fool it. No potion could alter what it found. It worked directly with the bank's own magic, which was older than Hogwarts and considerably less interested in politics. Sharpclaw set it on the desk in front of the baby. Touch it, he said, not expecting much, because the child was 15 months old. The baby reached out and touched it. The stone lit up like someone had pushed a star inside it. White light, then gold, then something deeper, a rich, warm amber that pulsed like breathing and threw long shadows across the entire hall. Every goblin in the room stopped what they were doing. Ledgers halted in midair. The quills stopped scratching. The low hum of Gringotts at 4 a.m. went completely silent. Sharpclaw leaned forward and read what the stone was writing. He read it once. He read it a second time. He sat back and was quiet for a long moment. Harrigan, he said. Sir. Wake Ragnarok. Harrigan's eyes went very wide. Ragnarok was the director of Gringotts, the most powerful goblin in Britain, possibly in Europe. He was also, at 4 a.m, almost certainly asleep, and he had opinions about being woken. Strong opinions. Opinions he expressed in ways that were memorable and occasionally permanent. Sir, should I? Yes, Sharpclaw said. Now. Tell him I have a lineage read that I need him to see personally. Tell him it relates to the Potter and Black family vaults. He paused. And tell him there are irregularities. He said irregularities in the tone of voice one might use to describe a fire as warm. Ragnarok arrived in 12 minutes. He was shorter than most humans expected, most goblins were, which most humans found confusing, as if height were the only measure of presence. He had a face that could have been carved from old teak, deeply lined, with eyes the color of hammered copper that had seen 2 wars and 4 changes of ministry and the rise and fall of 3 dark lords of varying ambition. He was wearing a house robe over his director's clothes because Harrigan had woken him and he hadn't bothered to change completely, and this somehow made him more imposing rather than less. He walked to the desk where Sharpclaw sat with the baby, looked at the child, looked at the lineage stone, and looked at the readout that the stone had produced. He read it once. He read it again. He picked it up and held it under the nearest floating light and read it a third time, very carefully, with the particular focused attention of someone who wants to make absolutely certain they're not misreading something before they do anything irreversible. He set it down. Get me, he said, in a voice of extraordinary calm, the current status of Vault 713. The Potter Family Vault. The Black Family Trust Vault. The Potter Black Joint Inheritance Account. And every vault with Dumbledore listed as a signatory or custodian in any capacity. The room erupted into quiet, precise, very fast movement. Ragnarok pulled a chair to the desk and sat down across from the baby. The baby looked at him with those green eyes. Ragnarok looked back. They regarded each other for a moment in the way that two beings sometimes do when they recognize, without being able to articulate why, that they are in the presence of someone significant. "Harry Potter," Ragnarok said. The baby's eyes focused on him. "I am Ragnarok, director of Gringotts." He paused. "You are going to need a bath." The baby grabbed his finger. Ragnarok allowed this. He did not look at his own expression, and he was grateful that no one else was looking at it either, because he had not held a child since his daughter had been young, and his daughter had been dead for 40 years, and the weight of a small hand around his finger was not something he'd been expecting to feel tonight. He looked at the lineage stone readout again. Harry James Potter. Born July 31, 1980. Heir to the ancient and noble house of Potter. Heir to the ancient and noble house of Black through maternal inheritance claim, Doria Potter née Black, great-grandmother, confirmed bloodline. Heir to the Peveril estate, dormant, unlocked by confirmed survival of killing curse, first recorded instance in magical history. Heir to the Gryffindor and Slytherin co-inheritance through the Peveril line. That part alone was remarkable enough to stop a lesser being in their tracks. Sharpclaw had been right to wake him. But it was the next section that had made Ragnarok's jaw do something it hadn't done in 20 years, which was nearly drop. Current account status, compromised. Active drainage detected on Potter primary vault, 7 years of quarterly withdrawals, signatory Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, citing custodial authority, no such authority on file. Active drainage detected on Potter Black Joint Trust, 11 irregular disbursements over 4 years, signatory same. Black Family Trust Vault, access restricted by spurious ministry order dated 1979, beneficiary listed as Narcissa Black Malfoy diverted, signatory on ministry order, Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. Gryffindor Airship Artifacts, 3 removed from Vault 713, destination unknown. Peveril Airship Artifacts, Invisibility Cloak, currently held under custodial seal, signatory, Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. The baby fell asleep against Ragnarok's arm while he was reading. Ragnarok sat with the sleeping child and the damning stone and the slowly widening picture of what Albus Dumbledore had been doing, and felt something that he recognized, after a moment, as fury. Not the hot, reactive kind. The cold kind. The kind that calcified into determination and stayed there. Harrigan returned with the first of the vault reports. He read one line and his face went very still. He looked at Ragnarok. Ragnarok looked at him and said nothing because the child was asleep and something in the scene discouraged unnecessary noise. Harrigan set the report on the desk silently and went to get the next one. Over the next hour, the reports came in. Sharpclaw compiled them with the systematic thoroughness of someone who knew that documentation was more powerful than most weapons. The picture they assembled was meticulous, detailed, and extraordinarily damning. Dumbledore had been draining the Potter vaults since 1979, before the Potters died, before Harry was born. Small amounts at first, easily mistaken for estate management fees or rounding errors by anyone not paying close attention. After James and Lily went into hiding in 1981, the withdrawals had grown. The custodial claim he'd filed was internally inconsistent, the paperwork listed him as a ministry-appointed guardian, but no such appointment existed in ministry records. He'd simply written it down and no one at the bank had caught it because the amounts were small enough to slip under the standard audit threshold. Which meant, Ragnarok noted, that Dumbledore understood goblin audit systems well enough to exploit them. That was not comfortable information. The Black family situation was different. The ministry order restricting the Black Trust Vault access had been issued in 1979 under the Emergency Magical Powers Act, a wartime provision, and had Dumbledore's signature as Chief Warlock on the Wisengamot authorization. It had the appearance of legitimacy. The problem was that the legal basis cited in the order, a supposed financial crimes investigation against the Black family, had been closed in 1975. Using a closed investigation to justify a 1979 asset restriction was not just irregular. It was illegal. And the invisibility cloak. The invisibility cloak was a Peveril heirloom. It was in the Potter family vault and it had been transferred, under Dumbledore's signature, to personal custodial hold at an address in Hogsmeade that resolved, when Sharpclaw looked it up, to Dumbledore's private quarters at Hogwarts. He had taken the boy's ancestral invisibility cloak and put it in his bedroom closet. "I want legal," Ragnarok said, around 5 in the morning. "Wake Goldthorn and Ironjaw. I want them here within the hour. I want every document photographed and registered in the bank's official archive with a preservation seal. Nothing leaves, nothing is moved, nothing is discussed outside this room until I say otherwise." "And the child?" Grimtooth asked. She had finished her medical work and the baby's wounds had been cleaned and healed, the cuts on his hands closed neatly, the forehead scar deliberately, carefully left alone, because whatever magic lived in that scar was not something she was going to disturb without understanding it first. Ragnarok looked at the baby, who was still asleep, draped sideways across the arm of his chair with the total boneless commitment to unconsciousness that only very small children achieve. "The child," Ragnarok said, "is a ward of Gringotts Bank until further notice." Sharpclaw raised an eyebrow. "On what authority?" "Mine." Ragnarok looked at him with those copper-colored eyes. "And the bank's?" "He entered these premises unaccompanied, injured, and without a custodian. He is the heir to 3 accounts that are currently being defrauded. He is our client. His protection is our responsibility." A pause. "And he crawled here, Sharpclaw. Alone. Across half of Diagon Alley. At 4 in the morning. In October." Sharpclaw was quiet. "If we hand him to Dumbledore," Ragnarok said, "we hand him back to the man stealing from him. If we hand him to the Ministry, we hand him to an institution that co-signed the theft." He looked at the baby. "Gringotts takes care of its clients." No one argued with that. Dawn came gray and wet over Diagon Alley. By 6 in the morning, the wizarding world was beginning to understand that something had happened the night before. There were no smartphones to spread the news, no internet, no television coverage, but the magical world had its own communication networks and they were remarkably efficient when something earth-shaking occurred. Owls crossed the sky in unusual numbers. Patron uses flickered through Ministry corridors. The portrait network in Hogwarts, which was essentially a medieval social media platform staffed entirely by gossipy oil paintings, had been crackling with fragments since 3 in the morning. He who must not be named. Defeated. The Potter boy. Both parents gone. The boy who lived. The phrase appeared in the gossip circuit, as phrases sometimes did, as though it had always been there waiting to be used. The boy who lived. People who had been living in terror for 10 years heard it and wept in their kitchens. They lit fireworks. They drank toasts. The pubs in Hogsmeade opened 3 hours early and served free butterbeer to everyone who walked in. Albus Dumbledore, who had been awake since midnight doing the careful arithmetic of catastrophe management, allowed himself 20 minutes of genuine grief for James and Lily Potter and then did what he always did, he began to think about what came next. The boy needed to go somewhere safe. Somewhere protected by the most powerful blood magic Dumbledore knew, and there was really only one option, the maternal blood connection with Lily's sister, Petunia Dursley, who lived in Surrey and who was, by all accounts, a difficult woman. That was fine. A difficult guardian in a protected house was better than what Voldemort's remaining supporters might do if the boy was left somewhere accessible. Hagrid would collect Harry. Sirius Black, he was almost certainly coming, if he wasn't already there. Sirius would have to be handled. Dumbledore was already composing the reasoning in his head, the boy needs somewhere safe, somewhere Voldemort's followers can't reach him, trust me Sirius, I have a plan. He'd given that speech, in various configurations, to a great many people. He was very good at it. He sent his Patronus to Hagrid at 7 in the morning. The response came back 14 minutes later. Hagrid had gone to Godric's Hollow. The house was destroyed. Lily and James were confirmed dead. Harry was not there. Dumbledore sat with that information in his office at Hogwarts, the various instruments ticking and humming around him, and turned it over carefully. Not in the rubble. Not in the immediate area. He'd run a locator charm immediately and it had come back blank, which meant either Harry was dead, no, the stone had lit up, word from the network was clear, the boy had survived, or something was blocking the charm. He tried the charm again. It came back blank again. Dumbledore frowned. Locator charms failed for 3 reasons: the subject was dead, the subject was behind extraordinary magical shielding, or the subject was under the protection of a magical entity whose own power overrode the charm. He stood and walked to his window and looked out across the Hogwarts grounds in the early morning light, and something at the edge of his very considerable mind made a connection that he did not like at all. His gaze drifted, involuntarily, toward the south. Toward London. Toward Diagon Alley. No, he said to his empty office. He said it with the certainty of someone who needed it to be true. The certainty didn't help. Inside Gringotts, Harry Potter woke up on a proper bed in the medical ward with bandaged hands and a clean face and a goblin healer sitting 3 feet away who immediately recorded the time of waking in a ledger. He sat up. He looked around. He saw stone walls and warm golden light and rows of interesting-looking shelves and Grimtooth watching him from her chair with an expression of professional assessment. He pointed at one of the shelves. "You cannot have that," Grimtooth said. "It is a medical compound." He pointed at something else. "That either." He pointed at her pen. She considered this, and then handed it over, because at least it wasn't toxic. He examined it with complete concentration, turned it over, ran his fingers along the length of it, and then appeared satisfied and set it down. Intelligent, Grimtooth noted in her ledger. High magical sensitivity. Shows unusual focus for age. Wound on forehead, stable, magical residue present but not active. Will require ongoing monitoring. Healing accelerated beyond normal infant rate, possible correlation with survival event. Harry pulled himself to the edge of the bed and looked over the side at the floor, calculating the drop with a seriousness that made Grimtooth put her ledger down and move her chair closer. "Don't," she said. He looked at her. "You can walk, but the floor is stone and you will fall and I will have to fix you again and it will waste both of our mornings." He seemed to consider this as a reasonable argument. He sat back. Ragnarok arrived at 8:30, which was the earliest he'd been in the medical ward since the mining accident of 1943. He brought with him a small breakfast tray that was absolutely not something directors of Gringotts typically carried, and this fact was noted by every goblin he passed in the corridor and would be discussed extensively later. He set the tray on the bed and sat down. Harry looked at the food. He looked at Ragnarok. He looked at the food again. "It is not poisoned," Ragnarok said dryly. "Goblins do not poison their clients. We have considerably more creative options." Harry picked up a piece of toast. They sat in something that was not quite silence. Grimtooth's pen scratched, somewhere below them a cart rumbled, the bank lived and breathed around them, and Ragnarok watched the child eat and turned the events of the night over in his mind for perhaps the 30th time. He had made his decision. He'd made it, if he was honest, in the moment when Sharpclaw had said he crawled here, alone, across half of Diagon Alley, at 4 in the morning, in October, because the image of it had lodged somewhere in Ragnarok's chest in a way that very few images did anymore. He was 300 years old. He had seen human children treated as tokens and prizes and weapons and burdens and occasionally, when humans were at their best, as children. He had not expected to feel protective. He was not, structurally, a protective being. He was feeling protective anyway. "The legal team," he said to Grimtooth, who had become accustomed over 40 years to Ragnarok using her as a sounding board, "are in session. I've given them until noon to give me a full accounting of what can be documented, what can be filed, and what timeline they recommend for action. And Dumbledore? Ragnar's expression was very still. Dumbledore will realize by this evening, perhaps sooner, that the boy is not where he expected him to be. He will make inquiries. He will eventually come to Gringotts. He paused. He is welcome to. Grimtooth looked at him. You intend to make this a confrontation? I intend, Ragnar said, to do what Gringotts has always done. I intend to follow the law. Every treaty, every financial regulation, every goblin protection statute. I intend to file every appropriate legal instrument. He looked at Harry, who had finished the toast and was examining an apple with cautious respect. And when Albus Dumbledore walks through our front doors and tells me he has come for his ward, I intend to show him every single document we found last night and ask him, very politely, to explain himself. He won't be able to, Grimtooth said. No, Ragnar agreed. He won't. Outside, the wizarding world was celebrating. Fireworks exploded over Diagon Alley, visible from the bank's high windows, gold and red and green sparks against the morning sky, the world's relief at the end of 10 years of shadow erupting in noise and light and freely poured drinks. Somewhere in that celebration, people were already making the boy who lived into a legend. Already building the story of the child who had defeated the Dark Lord. They had no idea where he was. Inside Gringotts, in the medical ward, Harry Potter finished his apple and held out his hands to Ragnar, arms up, the universal infant signal for I want to be picked up now. Ragnar looked at those small, outstretched arms. He looked at Grimtooth, who suddenly found her ledger extremely interesting. He looked at the apple core on the tray. He picked the boy up. Harry settled against his shoulder with the complete, trusting weight of someone who had made a decision and was comfortable with it, and Ragnar stood at the window of the medical ward and watched the fireworks and held the most powerful magical child in Britain, and felt the cold shape of what was coming settle around him like armor. Dumbledore was going to come. He was ready. The ledgers were ready. Gringotts was ready. And Harry Potter, who had crawled across half of London in the dark with bleeding hands and a lightning bolt scar and no one to help him, who had climbed 11 marble steps and opened bronze doors with a touch and fallen asleep against the arm of a 300-year-old goblin like it was the safest place in the world, Harry Potter was, for the first time since the house in Godric's Hollow had stopped existing, safe. The wind outside carried the sounds of celebration. The copper stars from the nursery were ash in the ruins. But something else was here now, something that had started when a small hand touched a glowing stone in the early hours of the morning, and it was not ash and it was not ending. It was, in every sense that mattered, just beginning. Chapter 2, What the Ledgers Know. The first thing Dumbledore did when he arrived at Gringotts was smile. It was a good smile, warm, slightly tired, carrying the precise weight of a man who had been through a terrible night and was now doing his duty regardless. He'd chosen his robes carefully. Deep blue, not too formal, the kind of thing a grandfather figure wore. The half-moon spectacles. The silver beard. He came alone, without ministry escort, which was a deliberate choice. He wanted this to feel like a personal visit, a concerned elder collecting a lost child, not an official action. He arrived at 10 in the morning on the 1st of November, while the rest of the wizarding world was still celebrating in the streets. Sharpclaw was at the main desk. He looked up when Dumbledore approached and his expression said nothing at all, which was its own kind of message. "Good morning," Dumbledore said. "I'm looking for a child. A young boy, approximately 15 months old, dark hair, green eyes. He may have been brought in last night, or found near the premises. I'm his guardian." Sharpclaw looked at him for a moment. "Your name?" "Albus Dumbledore." He offered the name the way he always did, with the slight self-deprecating pause that acknowledged his own fame while pretending not to trade on it. "One moment," Sharpclaw said, and disappeared through a door behind the counter. Dumbledore waited. He looked around the hall, the floating ledgers, the busy tellers, the extraordinary scale of the place. He had always found Gringotts slightly uncomfortable, which he would never have admitted to anyone. There was something about the bank that didn't respond to him the way things usually did. Most institutions bent, very slightly, in his direction. Gringotts simply didn't. Sharpclaw returned. "Director Ragnarok will see you. This way, please." Dumbledore followed him down a corridor he had not walked before, not the standard meeting rooms where Gringotts handled routine wizard business, but deeper into the bank, through halls where the stone was older and the light came from veins of mineral luminescence rather than torches. They went down one level and then through a heavy door banded in iron and stopped at an office at the end of the hall. The office was large and purposeful. No decoration for its own sake, everything in it worked. Shelves of ledgers with color-coded spines. A desk that held exactly what was needed and nothing else. A fireplace that was currently not lit because the room was warm enough from the deep stone. And behind the desk, Ragnarok, who looked up from the document he was reading with the unhurried attention of someone who had been expecting this visit and had prepared for it. "Headmaster Dumbledore," Ragnarok said. "Sit down." It was not phrased as an invitation. Dumbledore sat. "I understand you're here about the Potter child," Ragnarok said. "I am. I'm his appointed guardian. I've been trying to locate him since last night and I have reason to believe he may have, through some accidental magic, found his way here. I'd like to take him home." "To where?" Ragnarok asked. Dumbledore blinked. "I'm sorry. Where would you take him?" "I'm asking specifically. The Potter home in Godric's Hollow is destroyed. The Potters had no other property registered in your name. Where would you take the child?" "I have arrangements in place. A safe house with family. His mother's sister, Petunia Dursley, née Evans, of number 4 Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey," Ragnarok said, reading from the open document in front of him. "A muggle. No magical ability. No knowledge of or connection to the wizarding world beyond her late sister." He looked up. "And your basis for appointing yourself the child's guardian, and making this placement decision, is what exactly?" Dumbledore was quiet for just a moment too long. Not long enough that a less observant being would have noticed. Ragnarok noticed. "The Potters trusted me with their son's welfare," Dumbledore said. "In the event of their deaths, do you have documentation of that trust? A magical will? A formal guardianship contract filed with the Wizengamot or the Ministry of Magic's Family Services Division?" "The situation is somewhat irregular." "Given the war, yes," Ragnarok said. "The situation is irregular. I agree." He turned the document he'd been reading around and pushed it across the desk. "That is the current status of the Potter primary vault. I'd like you to look at it." Dumbledore looked at it. His expression didn't change. That was, Ragnarok noted, genuinely impressive. Most people, shown evidence of their own crimes, showed something, a micro-expression, a shift in posture, a pause in breathing. Dumbledore looked at the drainage records and the flagged transactions and his own name appearing next to amounts he had no authority to withdraw, and his face was perfectly, completely still. "There appears to be some kind of accounting error," Dumbledore said. 7 years of accounting errors," Ragnarok said pleasantly. "All in the same direction. All under your signature. Some of them predating the Potters' deaths by 2 years. He slid a second document across. "That is the Black Family Trust Restriction Order. The one you co-signed as Chief Warlock. The one that cites a financial investigation closed 4 years before the order was issued." Dumbledore looked at the second document. "And this," Ragnarok said, sliding a third, "is the vault transfer record for a Peveril heirloom, specifically, an invisibility cloak of unique magical provenance, currently residing in an address that our records identify as your private quarters at Hogwarts." The 3 documents sat on the desk between them like a wall. Dumbledore took off his glasses, cleaned them with a fold of his robe, and put them back on. It was his thinking gesture, the one he used when he needed a moment. Ragnar had been told about it by several people who'd negotiated with him and he'd filed it away. These are serious allegations, Dumbledore said. Yes, Ragnar said. They are. They are also not allegations. They are records. Gringotts records are magically sealed from alteration at the point of entry. These documents are what they are. He paused. I am not, at this moment, involving the ministry. I am not, at this moment, filing a formal legal complaint. I am showing you what we found because you have walked into my bank and told me you are the child's guardian, and I want you to understand that I know what you have done and I am keeping this information carefully. Dumbledore looked at him. Really looked at him. And Ragnar saw, for the first time, the thing behind the warm grandfather facade, the immense, careful intelligence of a man who had been playing chess while everyone else played drafts, who was now sitting across from someone who had taken several of his pieces off the board while he wasn't watching. Harry needs to be protected, Dumbledore said. It came out quietly, without the performance. Just the statement. Voldemort's supporters are not all imprisoned. There are people who will come for him. I'm aware, Ragnar said. Gringotts has considerably more effective protection than a Muggle house in Surrey. The blood protection is one form of protection among many. Not the only one. Not necessarily the best one. Ragnar's voice stayed level. What you are describing, Headmaster, is raising a child in ignorance of his heritage, in a household with no magical community, no knowledge of who he is, no access to his inheritance, a household, I note, where he is not the family's child and may not be treated as one. You are describing raising him to be small. The word landed with more weight than either of them had expected. Dumbledore was quiet. I am not accusing you of malice, Ragnar said, and meant it, which made it worse. I am telling you what the outcome would be. A child raised to be grateful for scraps. A child who doesn't know what he is or what he's owed. A child who arrives at Hogwarts at 11 years old ignorant of every magical tradition and every legal right and every inheritance and every contract and every debt that his name carries. He looked at Dumbledore steadily. That child is easier to manage. Is he not? It was not a question. Dumbledore said nothing for a long time. Outside the office, the distant sounds of Gringotts went on, the rumble of carts, the scratch of quills, the immense machinery of the most powerful financial institution in the magical world grinding forward without pause. What do you intend to do with him? Dumbledore asked finally. Raise him, Ragnar said. You are not a wizard. Goblins do not what? Ragnar's voice sharpened, just slightly, for the first time. We do not care for children. We do not build communities. We do not understand loyalty and education and the raising of those who will carry something forward. He let a pause develop. The child is our client. He entered our bank. He is owed protection under 7 different goblin wizard treaties and under Gringotts' own charter. He has no living parent. He has no documented guardian with legal standing. And the closest person claiming guardianship over him has been stealing from his family for 7 years. Dumbledore leaned forward. He will need a Hogwarts education. He will need the wizarding world, he will have both. At the appropriate time. Under the appropriate conditions. Ragnar picked up his pen. He will not, however, be delivered to a Muggle suburb to be raised without knowledge of his name. Not by you. Not by anyone. He looked up. You may go, Headmaster. Dumbledore stood slowly. He picked up his hat from the hook beside the door where he'd placed it on arrival. He paused. This isn't over, he said. Not as a threat. More like an acknowledgement. No, Ragnar agreed. It isn't. But it has changed. He held Dumbledore's gaze. Considerably. Dumbledore left. Ragnar sat in his chair for a moment after the door closed, and then reached into his desk drawer for the correspondence he drafted at 5 in the morning and set it on the desk in front of him. 3 letters. The first to the Goblin liaison at the Ministry of Magic, a formal notification, carefully worded, citing Gringotts' charter protection of a minor client, sharing nothing that wasn't legally required to be shared. The second to Goldthorn, his head of legal, authorizing the full audit of every vault and transaction connected to Albus Dumbledore's signature across the past decade. The third letter was addressed to Azkaban. It was the shortest of the three. It said only, Sirius Orion Black, imprisoned November 1981 without trial. Gringotts is in possession of information material to this case. Please advise which ministry official to contact regarding formal review. He sealed all three with the bank's official seal and sent them out by bank courier, which moved faster than owls and couldn't be intercepted by anyone who didn't want to start a war with Gringotts. Then he went to the medical ward to check on Harry, who had, in his absence, pulled himself upright against the side of the bed and was standing, wobbly, determined, deeply pleased with himself, while Grimtooth watched from her chair with an expression she absolutely wasn't letting become fond. He stood up, Grimtooth reported. "I can see that," Ragnarok said. Harry saw Ragnarok, made a sound of satisfaction, and took one step toward him before his legs disagreed with the plan and he sat down hard on the stone floor. He looked down at his legs with an expression of betrayal. Then he looked up at Ragnarok. "Walk," Ragnarok told him. "Not encouraging, exactly. Factual." Harry pulled himself up against the bed again. 3 weeks passed. The wizarding world settled into its new reality, Voldemort gone, the Potters dead, the boy who lived somewhere. Dumbledore gave carefully vague answers in his various public roles when people asked about Harry. Safe. Protected. In good hands. The phrases were technically defensible and revealed nothing. The prophet ran a story about a mysterious magical child spotted near Gringotts that was quickly followed by an official Gringotts statement saying they did not comment on client information, which told everyone who was paying attention exactly what had happened without confirming anything. Inside the bank, Harry was learning to walk. It happened over 4 days, first 3 steps, then 7, then a full transit of the medical ward that ended in him sitting down deliberately rather than falling, which Grimtooth recorded as a sign of planning ability. By the end of the month he was moving through Gringotts with a confidence that was occasionally alarming, given that the floors were stone and the corners were sharp and he was 15 months old. 2 junior staff members were reassigned to what became informally known as Harry Watch, a role that was theoretically beneath them and which they both accepted immediately when they understood what was involved. Their names were Forgehammer and Quicksilver. Forgehammer was young by Goblin standards, barely 80, with a broad face and a practical manner and absolutely no patience for nonsense. Quicksilver was a century older and had the quick, watchful energy of someone who had survived several things that would have ended lesser beings. They became Harry's first real companions in the way that the people you spend your days with always become companions, whether you plan it or not. Harry liked them because they were honest. Goblins were honest in the way that very sharp knives were honest. They didn't pretend to be something they weren't, they didn't soften things unnecessarily, they told you what was true and left you to do something with it. Harry, at 15 months, could not have articulated any of this. He simply walked toward them when he wanted something and sat near them when he didn't, and learned that when Forgehammer said stop it meant stop and when Quicksilver made a particular clicking sound with her teeth it meant something interesting is about to happen, pay attention. He was, by every measure Grimtooth applied in her increasingly detailed medical ledger, extraordinary. His magic manifested more often and more deliberately than any infant she had seen. By the time he was 18 months old he was moving small objects toward himself with a consistency that suggested not random accidental magic but something closer to intent. By 2 years old he had figured out that the floating ledgers in the main hall could be redirected if you looked at them with sufficient focus, which caused a minor administrative incident that the tellers discussed for weeks. Ragnarok taught him to count using coins from the samples drawer when he was 2.5. He had him doing basic sums by 3, not because he was in a hurry, but because Harry found numbers satisfying in the way some children found colors or music satisfying. They were true, they were consistent, they didn't change depending on who was looking at them. The first time Harry saw the outside, properly, not just the view from the medical ward window, was when Ragnock brought him to the main hall entrance on a quiet Tuesday morning in early 1984 and let him stand at the top of the marble steps and look at Diagon Alley spread below him. Harry was 2 years and 3 months old. He stood at the top of 11 steps that he'd once climbed bleeding and alone, and looked at the alley below, the shops, the people, the owls overhead, the general cheerful chaos of a magical marketplace going about its morning, and was completely quiet for almost a full minute. Then he looked at Ragnock and said, in a voice that was still figuring out consonants, "Big." "Yes," Ragnock said. "Ours?" Ragnock paused. "The bank is ours. The alley is shared." Harry looked at the alley again and appeared to file this distinction away. Dumbledore came back to Gringotts twice in 1982 and once in 1983. Each time he was received by Sharpclaw, who was unfailingly courteous and completely immovable. Each time Dumbledore came with slightly different approaches, the first time with ministry documentation, the second time with a Wisengamot resolution, the third time with what he described as a formal magical guardianship claim filed under the orphaned heir provisions of 1867. Each time Sharpclaw reviewed the documentation carefully, found a specific point at which it either didn't apply, had been procedurally incorrectly filed, or was superseded by Goblin Wizard treaty provisions that predated it, and explained this in the same polite, thorough, granite-solid tone. The Wisengamot resolution was the most interesting attempt. Dumbledore had managed to get 17 Wisengamot members to sign a declaration naming him Harry's official guardian. Sharpclaw had reviewed it, noted that it had not been signed by the full quorum required for a guardianship declaration under the 1962 Magical Children's Welfare Act, noted further that Harry, as heir to an ancient and noble house, could only have his guardianship assigned by a full Wisengamot session at which the Gringotts Vault's account manager had the right to be present and object, and then noted with particular care that the account manager in question would, if called to such a session, be required to bring the vault audit documentation. Dumbledore had withdrawn the resolution before it came to a full session. After the third visit, he stopped coming in person. That didn't mean he stopped trying. There were ministry owls, some official and some less so. There was a visit from Cornelius Fudge, who was not yet minister but was already practicing the art of being professionally helpful to powerful people in ways that left no paper trail. There were 2 separate attempts by individuals who were not goblins and not invited to access the bank's lower levels, both of which were detected and neutralized with the efficiency that Gringotts brought to security threats, which was essentially the same efficiency it brought to everything else. And there was Arabella Figg. She turned up in Diagon Alley 3 times in 1982 with the particular air of someone who was there for an innocent reason and working very hard to project that. Forgehammer noticed her on the first visit and mentioned it to Ragnock, who said nothing and filed it away. By the third visit, Ragnock mentioned, in passing, to a teller who was known to have a loud voice and a tendency to repeat things, that Gringotts had recently upgraded its external surveillance wards to include 300 meters in every direction. Arabella Figg did not return to Diagon Alley after that. The audit finished in 1983. Goldthorn presented it to Ragnock in a meeting that lasted 4 hours and included 17 subreports and a summary document that ran to 90 pages. The full extent of what Dumbledore had taken from the Potter estate over the previous decade was 14,000 galleons directly from the primary vault, using a false custodial claim. 42,000 galleons redirected from the Potter-Black Joint Trust through a series of intermediary accounts, some of which traced to Order of the Phoenix operational expenses, some of which traced to a personal account at a French magical bank, and some of which had been distributed as what appeared to be unofficial payments to ministry officials. The invisibility cloak, worth more than any amount of galleons as a Peveril heirloom. And the Black Family Trust restriction, which had prevented Narcissa Malfoy from receiving her inheritance and, more significantly, had prevented Sirius Black from using his own assets to mount a legal defense. That last point was the one that caught Ragnock's attention most sharply. Sirius Black had been imprisoned in Azkaban since November 1981. He had not received a trial. He had been arrested on the testimony of one witness, Peter Pettigrew, who was now dead, having apparently been killed by Black himself, and the circumstantial evidence of the street explosion in Muggle London. There had been no veritaserum questioning. No Wisengamot hearing. The decision to imprison him had been made by Bartemius Crouch Sr. under the emergency wartime powers and had been, as far as anyone could tell, never formally reviewed. The reason no one had mounted a legal challenge on Black's behalf was that Black's assets had been frozen. He couldn't hire counsel. His family's accounts were restricted. The people who might have helped him were either dead, in hiding, or operating under the impression that he was guilty. Ragnarok looked at the audit conclusion on that specific point for a long time. Then he looked at the letter he'd sent to Azkaban 2 years ago and the response he'd received, which had been a polite bureaucratic brush-off from a mid-level ministry official saying that the matter was under review. He had not pushed at that point because he'd needed the full audit. Now he had it. He picked up his pen. The letter he wrote that afternoon was considerably less polite than the first one. It was addressed to Amelia Bones, head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, a woman Ragnarok had dealt with twice before and found to be the unusual thing, in his experience, a ministry official who was actually interested in whether things were legal. It cited specific sections of the Wisengamot Act, specific ministry regulations on pre-trial detention limits, and specific evidence of financial interference that had prevented any review of the Black case. It requested an immediate formal inquiry. It arrived on Bones' desk the following morning. Her response came in 4 hours, formal inquiry approved. I will need access to the documents you reference. He sent copies that afternoon. Harry was 4 when Ragnarok first sat him down at a table in the bank's small library, not the main archive, which was a vast cavern of an affair, but the library on the 3rd level that was used for client research and staff education, warmer and more human-scaled, lined with books that covered everything from magical law to mineral magic to goblin history, and said, I'm going to tell you about yourself. Harry sat with his legs dangling off the edge of the chair and looked at Ragnarok with the calm, focused attention he'd given everything since he was old enough to focus on things. Your name is Harry James Potter, Ragnarok said. Your parents were James Potter and Lily Potter, née Evans. They died in October 1981. They died protecting you. Harry was quiet. He had known his parents were dead. This was not a thing anyone had tried to hide from him, because goblins did not hide deaths from children. It was considered both dishonest and counterproductive. He had photographs. Ragnarok had obtained them from the Potter vault early on, a wedding photograph, a photo of James with a Quidditch team, Lily laughing in a garden with her hair on fire red in summer light, a photo of all 3 of them together when Harry was 6 months old and James was making faces to make him laugh. He knew their faces. He had looked at those photographs the way children look at things they are trying to understand from the inside out. You are the heir to the House of Potter, Ragnarok continued. That is a very old house. Your great-great-grandmother was a Black, which means you are also the heir to a claim on the House of Black, through bloodline. There is also a lineage that runs back to a family called Peveril. They were very old. Their line produced certain magical objects that are famous. The Deathly Hallows, Harry said. Ragnarok looked at him. Where did you hear that? Harry pointed at a shelf. There was a book on it, Beetle the Bard, the illustrated edition, which Quicksilver had brought him when he was 2 because it had good pictures. The story, Harry said. Yes. The story. It is, Ragnarok paused. It is based on something real. Which is a longer conversation. But yes. Your family line connects to those objects. He looked at Harry. One of them belongs to you. It is currently being held by someone who took it without authority. Harry said nothing. I want you to understand, Ragnarok said carefully, that there are things that belong to you that are not in your possession. And there are people who made decisions about your life without your knowledge or permission. When you are older, those things will come back to you. But I want you to know about them now because I am not going to raise you to be surprised by your own history. Harry looked at the photograph of his parents on the table between them. Ragnarok had brought it from the library's small file of Harry's documents. He looked at Lily laughing in the garden. He looked at James making faces. The person who took my things, Harry said. He was 4 years old and his vocabulary was better than most adults expected. Is he going to try to get me back? He may, Ragnarok said honestly. Can he? No, Ragnarok said. Not a reassurance. A fact. Harry nodded once, decisively, and pushed the photograph back across the table to Ragnarok, not dismissively, but with the air of someone who had absorbed what they needed and was ready for the next thing. Can I learn numbers today? He said. Ragnarok pulled the counting materials from his bag. In January 1985, Amelia Bones opened the formal inquiry into Sirius Black's imprisonment. It was not a fast process. The wizarding legal system moved at the pace of institutions that had been doing things a particular way for several centuries and were not inclined to rush. But Bones was thorough and she was dogged, and she had Ragnarok's documentation, and she had, in particular, the audit record showing that the Black family assets had been illegally restricted at the same time Sirius was imprisoned, which raised a question she found very difficult to dismiss. If someone had ensured Black had no financial resources and no access to legal counsel, who had that served? The inquiry discovered, after 8 months, 3 things. First, Peter Pettigrew, the alleged victim, had not in fact been killed by Sirius Black. The forensic magical analysis of the street in Muggle London showed that the spell detonation had originated from a location consistent with Pettigrew's position, not Black's. Someone had reviewed this evidence in 1981 and either missed it or chosen to ignore it. Second, Sirius Black was the Potter's secret keeper in name only. The Potters had switched secret keepers at the last moment, to Pettigrew, whom they trusted and who was smaller and less obvious a target. This switch had been witnessed. One of the witnesses was still alive, Remus Lupin, who had not come forward in 1981 because he had been in the depths of a post-transformation illness in a remote location and had not known about Black's arrest until 3 weeks after it happened, and by then everyone had told him Black was guilty and he had been too grief-sick to push. Third, the decision not to give Sirius Black a trial had been made by Bartemius Crouch Sr. The written authorization for this decision had been countersigned. The countersigning official was Albus Dumbledore, in his capacity as Chief Warlock of the Wizengamot. Bones sat with that document for a long time. Then she went to Azkaban personally. Sirius Black, in January 1986, was 36 years old and looked 60. For years in Azkaban did things to people that couldn't be undone by anything simple. His face was gaunt, his hair was long and matted, his eyes had the hollow quality of someone who had spent years in the company of creatures that ate happiness. He was thin in the way that was more alarming than simple hunger, thin at some more fundamental level. But when Amelia Bones sat down across from him and said, "I need you to tell me about Peter Pettigrew and the secret keeper arrangement," something came back into his face like a match being struck. He talked for 4 hours. At the end of it, Bones said, "I have one more question." She put a document on the table between them. "Do you know a boy named Harry Potter is currently under the protection of Gringotts Bank?" What happened to Sirius Black's face in that moment was not something Amelia Bones would have been able to describe accurately afterward. It was too many things at once, relief and grief and something fierce and raw that had no single name. "He's alive," Sirius said. It came out barely a whisper. "Very much so," Bones said. 5 years old, by all accounts healthy, and the subject of an ongoing financial fraud investigation involving his estate. She paused. "Director Ragnarok of Gringotts is the one who surfaced the information about your case. He's been filing requests about you since 1981. Sirius was staring at the table. "Ragnarok," he said, like he was placing the name. "The goblins found Harry," Bones said simply. "And they've been looking after him." Sirius was quiet for a long moment. When he looked up, the hollow quality was still there, for years of Azkaban didn't empty in an afternoon, but underneath it, something was burning. The kind of fire that had kept him alive in there, probably. The knowledge that there was something left to come back to. "How do I get out?" he said. "You attend a formal Wizengamot hearing," Bones said, "which I am scheduling for March. You submit to Veritaserum questioning, which I am confident will clear you, given what the forensic evidence already shows. And then you walk out the front gate. And Dumbledore? Bones' expression was very careful. Dumbledore will be subpoenaed to testify at your hearing on the matter of the countersignature. Beyond that, I am not in a position to comment on the direction of the investigation. Sirius looked at her steadily. Can I see Harry? After? I believe that's ultimately a matter for Ragnarok, Bones said. Sirius laughed. It was a rough, unpracticed sound, a laugh that had been in storage for 4 years, and it had a painful quality, but it was real. Of course it is. Of course the goblins are running it. He shook his head. Lily always said the bank was the only honest institution in Britain. He said Lily's name and his face did something quiet and complicated, and then he pressed it down with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been pressing things down for 4 years. Get me out, he said. I'll do whatever the process requires. Just get me out. Harry was 5 when Forgehammer first gave him a practice sword. It was a training blade, light, balanced for a child's hands, with a blunted edge and a carved grip that Forgehammer had made himself over 3 evenings in the workshop. It wasn't standard goblin practice to arm human children. But Harry had been watching the security staff train in the lower corridors for 2 years, following Forgehammer on his rounds and stopping outside the training room and watching through the door gap with complete, focused attention, and Forgehammer had brought it up with Ragnarok in the blunt way he brought up most things. He watches the drills every day, Forgehammer said. He's memorizing the patterns. He practices them in the hall when he thinks no one is looking. He should either be taught or told not to do it, and I think telling him not to do it is a waste. Ragnarok had considered this for approximately 3 seconds. Teach him. The first lesson had been about stance. Forgehammer had stood Harry in the center of the training room and placed his feet in the correct positions and said, "This is where the balance comes from. Everything else is built on this." Harry had stood in that stance and felt it, the way the weight distributed, the way you could shift forward or back without losing your center, and something clicked in him the way things clicked when they were right. He was a natural. Not in the way that meant it came without effort, but in the way that meant the effort felt like the right shape for his body. He learned fast and he retained everything, and he never needed to be told the same thing twice, which Forgehammer, who had taught blade work for 40 years, found both gratifying and slightly unnerving. His magic responded to the sword work in a way that no one had quite expected. When Harry moved with focused intention, practicing a drill, executing a form, his magic steadied. The ambient crackle of it, the restless energy that had powered the ledger redirecting incident and various other small atmospheric disturbances over the years, settled into something more directed. Controlled. It was as if the physical discipline and the magical discipline were feeding each other. He channels through movement, Grimtooth said, watching a training session from the doorway. She had her ledger, because she always had her ledger. Kinetic magic focus. Uncommon in wizards. Very common in goblin warrior traditions. Ragnarok stood beside her. I know. You intended for this. I intended for him to learn how to be in his own body, Ragnarok said. The rest is his. The Wizengamot hearing for Sirius Black took place on March 15, 1986. Ragnarok attended. He was not required to, but he attended because he wanted to be present when Dumbledore was made to answer publicly for his countersignature, and because he wanted to hear the Veritaserum testimony with his own ears. The hearing room was packed. The Wizengamot's main chamber was built for ceremony, stone tiers, ancient magic woven into the walls, the kind of room that had heard many important things and remembered all of them. Sirius Black stood in the center in clean robes that weren't quite the right size, having been provided by the ministry stores because 4 years in Azkaban left you without much of a wardrobe. Under Veritaserum, he confirmed everything. The secret keeper switch. Pettigrew's betrayal. That he had not killed anyone that night, had gone to Pettigrew's location to confront him, and Pettigrew had detonated the street explosion himself, faked his death, and fled in rat form. He gave this testimony in the stripped, simple cadence of someone who had rehearsed the truth in their head for 4 years, and the room heard it in total silence. When Dumbledore was called to explain his countersignature on the no-trial order, he said that he had believed, at the time, based on available evidence, that a trial would be unduly dangerous given Black's alleged connections to Voldemort and the risk of supporters attempting to free him. Amelia Bones asked, in the tone of voice she used when she had already decided something and just needed it on record, "At the time you countersigned that order, were you in possession of information suggesting that Sirius Black might be innocent?" Dumbledore paused for just a fraction of a second. "I was not certain of anything." "That is not what I asked," Bones said. The pause stretched. "I believed," Dumbledore said carefully, "that the situation was complex and that, yes or no, headmaster." The room was very quiet. "There were inconsistencies I had not fully investigated," Dumbledore said. "It wasn't a yes. It wasn't a no. It was the answer of a man who was too careful to lie outright and too committed to his position to tell the full truth, and everyone in the room who was paying attention understood exactly what it meant. Sirius Black was acquitted by a vote of 31 to 4. He walked out the front gate of the Ministry of Magic into grey March sunshine and stood on the pavement and breathed the air without dementors in it for the first time in 4 years, and then he went directly to Diagon Alley. Ragnock met him at the entrance. "I want to see him," Sirius said. "I know," Ragnock said. "Come in." He brought him through the bank to the training room on the lower level, where Harry was in the middle of a drill with Forge Hammer, moving through a sequence with the small practice sword, focused and precise, his black hair sticking out in all directions, his green eyes locked on some interior point of concentration. Sirius stood in the doorway and looked at this child who had his mother's eyes and his father's hair and something that was entirely his own, the absolute composure of it, the focus, and didn't say anything for a moment. Harry finished the drill. He lowered the sword. He looked up and saw a strange man in the doorway next to Ragnock and gave him the steady, measuring look he gave everything. "Harry," Ragnock said. "This is Sirius Black. He was your parents' best friend." Harry looked at Sirius. Sirius looked at Harry. "You look exactly like your dad," Sirius said. His voice was hoarse. "Except the eyes. Those are lilies." Harry considered him. "You were in prison," he said. "Yeah." Sirius' jaw did something complicated. "I was." "Were you guilty?" "No." Harry nodded, once, accepting this without drama. He looked at Forge Hammer. "Can we finish tomorrow?" Forge Hammer made a sound that was approximately yes. Harry crossed the room to Sirius and stood in front of him and said, "Tell me about my dad." Sirius Black sat down on the floor of the Gringotts training room, expensive robes, wrong size, 4 years of Azkaban still in his face, and said, "Your dad was the best person I ever knew. Annoying as anything, but the best person." Harry sat down across from him, cross-legged, sword still in hand, and listened. Ragnock left them there and walked back up through the corridors of his bank. The audit was filed. The hearing was over. Sirius was free. The ledgers had done their work. There was still more to come. But tonight, in a training room on the lower level, a 5-year-old boy with green eyes was hearing his father's voice through someone who had loved him, and that was its own kind of balance restored. Ragnock went back to his office and picked up his pen. There were always more letters to write. Chapter 3, The Boy Who Walked in the Hogwarts letter arrived on a Tuesday. Harry was sitting at the desk in the library on the 3rd level, working through a text on magical contract law that was technically written for adult practitioners but which he'd asked for specifically after a conversation with Goldthorn about the legal status of the various Potterblack inheritance claims. The book was dense and occasionally infuriating, and he was on his 4th read-through of a particular clause about dormant heirship contracts when the owl arrived, a school owl, tawny, official, carrying a cream-colored envelope sealed with the Hogwarts crest. He took it from the owl, turned it over, read the address, Mr. H. Potter, 3rd level library, Gringotts Bank, Diagon Alley, and felt something shift in his chest. Not surprise. He'd known this was coming. Ragnarok had been talking about it for 2 years. More like the feeling of standing at the edge of something large and finally being close enough to look over the side. He broke the seal and read the letter once, put it down, then picked it up and read the specifics, the list of required books and equipment, the date, the platform. He noted that the letter listed his address as Gringotts and not as some muggle house in Surrey, which meant Hogwarts' tracking charm had found him where he actually was. He'd wondered about that. He set the letter aside, finished the clause he was working through, made a note in the margin, and then went to find Ragnarok. Ragnarok was in his office. He was always in his office at this hour. He looked up when Harry came in, saw the envelope, and said, "Sit down." Harry sat. He put the letter on the desk between them. Ragnarok read it. September 1st. Yes. You're ready. It wasn't a question. Harry answered it anyway. Yes. Ragnarok set the letter down and looked at Harry, really looked at him, the way he did sometimes, as if he was measuring something. Harry had grown used to this over the years. He didn't fidget under it. He looked back. Harry Potter at 11 was not what anyone in the wizarding world would have expected. He was not small, medium height for his age, with the kind of wiry build that came from 5 years of sword training and moving through a bank built for beings with different proportions. He had James Potter's permanently chaotic black hair and Lily's green eyes and a face that was still finding its final shape, all sharp attention and calm. The lightning bolt scar was there on his forehead, visible but unremarkable in the way that familiar things become unremarkable. He wore it the way you wore any feature you'd always had. What was most noticeable about him, what people who met him for the first time always mentioned afterward, was the stillness. Not coldness, not distance. Stillness. The particular quality of someone who was always paying attention and never needed to perform the fact that they were paying attention. "I want to talk about what you'll find there," Ragnarok said. "I know what I'll find," Harry said. "Some of it. Not all of it." Ragnarok leaned back in his chair. Hogwarts is a remarkable institution. It is also one that Dumbledore has run for 40 years and shaped considerably in that time. The staff are generally competent and some of them are exceptional. The student population includes people you will find useful, people you will find tiresome, and people who will have heard of you and built an idea of who you are that has very little to do with who you actually are. "The boy who lived," Harry said. "Yes. That." Ragnarok's expression was dry. "You will be famous in a way that you have been, to some extent, shielded from here. They will want things from you, your approval, your attention, your story. Some of them will want to be near you for what it gives them. Some will want to challenge you for the same reason. And Dumbledore? Dumbledore will be polite," Ragnarok said. "He is always polite. He will also be watching you very carefully and looking for leverage he no longer has." He paused. "Do not mistake his warmth for safety. He is not a bad man. He is a man who is accustomed to being the most important person in any room and who has spent 10 years building a story about you that he needs to be true. You are the main character of a story he wrote, and you have arrived not knowing your lines." Harry said nothing for a moment. "Then, what is the story?" "The humble orphan. The boy who survived by luck and love, who knows nothing of the world, who needs guidance and protection and will be grateful for both." Ragnarok looked at him steadily. "A child who doesn't know his own power is much easier to point at Voldemort. When the time comes." The name landed in the room without drama. Harry had known about Voldemort for years, the full account, not a child-sanitized version. He knew what had happened in Godric's Hollow. He knew the scar on his forehead was the residue of a killing curse that had failed, the first time in magical history that had ever happened, and he knew that failure meant something that nobody fully understood yet. He knew Voldemort wasn't gone, that a thing that had anchored itself so deeply in dark magic didn't simply cease. He knew that eventually there would be a confrontation. He had never lost sleep over it. Not because he was fearless, but because fear of something you couldn't yet act on was just noise, and he had very little patience for noise. "I'll handle Hogwarts," Harry said. "And Dumbledore. What about the legal case?" "Goldthorn files the formal estate recovery claim in October," Ragnarok said. "Once you are enrolled and your Hogwarts address is registered, you have standing as an emancipated minor under the ancient house's provision to bring the claim in your own name. The timing is intentional." He allowed himself a small, sharp smile. "You will be at Hogwarts when the papers are served on Dumbledore." Harry looked at him. "You want him distracted?" "I want him to know, in the first week of your Hogwarts education, that the legal action is active and that you are not the child he expected to walk through those doors." Ragnarok's voice was very even. "Information is a weapon, Harry. The timing of information is the blade's edge." Sirius came the night before to help him pack. He had an apartment in Diagon Alley now, 2 streets behind the bank, not far. He came most evenings and had dinner and sometimes stayed late playing Exploding Snap with Quicksilver, who took no prisoners and about whom Sirius had a complicated ongoing grievance regarding cheating that Quicksilver serenely denied. He had become, over 5 years, a strange and comfortable fixture, not quite family in the way that Ragnarok was something like family, but the thread that connected Harry to James and Lily, the person who knew the stories that the photographs couldn't tell. He arrived that evening with a wrapped package under his arm and the slightly over-controlled expression of someone who had feelings about something and was managing them with moderate success. "Don't make a thing of it," he said, handing Harry the package. Harry opened it. A broom polish set, professional quality. He raised an eyebrow. "First years aren't allowed their own brooms," Sirius said, "which is a stupid rule that I fully expect you to ignore. But when you do get a broom, you'll want to look after it properly." Harry set it on the trunk. "Thank you. Also." Sirius pulled a smaller box from his coat pocket. Inside was a photograph, not one Harry had seen before. James and Sirius, maybe 19 or 20, standing in front of the Hogwarts gates in summer light, both of them laughing at something outside the frame. They were so young in it. James had his arm around Sirius's neck and Sirius was trying and failing to look annoyed and both of them were incandescent with the energy of people who didn't know yet what was coming. "I thought you should have something of him that was," Sirius paused. "That was just him being happy. Not the war. Not anything heavy." He shrugged with the elaborate casualness that meant the opposite. "Just your dad being an idiot with his best mate." Harry looked at the photograph for a moment. James laughed in a loop, nudged Sirius, laughed again. "He looks like me," Harry said. "Doesn't he?" Sirius said quietly. Harry put the photograph in the front of his trunk where he could find it easily. "Sirius," he said. "Yeah. Tell me something Hogwarts that I won't get from a book." Sirius sat on the edge of the bed and thought about it genuinely, which Harry appreciated. He didn't immediately produce a favorite anecdote. He actually considered the question. "The castle," Sirius said finally, "is alive. Not metaphorically. The magic in the stones is old enough that it has something like preferences. If it likes you, doors open that weren't there before. If it doesn't, staircases will actively send you in circles." He paused. "Your dad had an instinct for it. The castle liked him. I think it'll like you too." "Based on what?" "Based on the fact that you crawled into Gringotts as a baby and the bank didn't eat you," Sirius said. "Ancient magical buildings can tell something about people." Harry considered this. "What house do you think I'll be in?" Sirius looked at him. It was a longer look than the question seemed to warrant. "Honest answer." "Always." "I genuinely have no idea," Sirius said. "And I say that having known your father, who was the most Gryffindor person who ever lived, and your mother, who could have been Ravenclaw or Gryffindor and chose Gryffindor anyway." He tilted his head. "You're brave, but you're not reckless. You're sharp, but it's not what drives you. You'd do what you thought was right even if it scared you, but you'd also plan it properly first." He shook his head. Put me on the spot, I'd say Gryffindor. But I've been wrong before. Slytherin might be interesting, Harry said, in a neutral tone. Sirius made a strangled sound. I'm thinking about it strategically, Harry said. Ragnarok says a third of the Wizengamot comes from old Slytherin families. If I'm going to navigate the political environment effectively, you are 11 years old, Sirius said. Yes. Please be 11 years old for at least the first week. Harry's mouth curved slightly. I'll consider it. September 1st was grey and cool and smelled of autumn and train smoke. King's Cross was a Muggle station with a hidden platform that accessed the magical world, which Harry found both logistically sensible and philosophically appropriate. The magical world lived inside the Muggle one, mostly unseen, operating by different rules in the same spaces. He had been in the Muggle world occasionally over the years, with Ragnarok or Sirius, and he found it interesting in the way that all carefully organized systems were interesting. Ragnarok came to the barrier with him. This was not strictly necessary and both of them knew it, but neither of them mentioned that. They stood at the barrier between platforms 9 and 10, and Ragnarok said, "You will write." "Every week," Harry said. "If you need anything, I'll write." Harry looked at him. "I know." A pause. Around them, the Muggle morning went about its business, commuters, pigeons, the echoey soundscape of a major rail station. "You are prepared for this," Ragnarok said. "I know," Harry said again. "I am not," Ragnarok stopped. Started again. "I want you to know that whatever happens at Hogwarts, whatever Dumbledore does or says, whatever the wizarding world throws at you, you know who you are. That does not change because you are in different walls." Harry looked at him for a moment. Then he put his hand on Ragnarok's arm briefly, a gesture that was, by now, natural between them, something they developed over years without deciding to. "I'll be fine," Harry said. And he meant it completely, which was the thing about Harry. When he said something, he had usually already thought it through from multiple angles, and by the time he said it, it was true. He walked through the barrier. Platform 9 3/4 hit him with sound and smoke and color all at once. The Hogwarts Express stood steaming at the platform, scarlet and vast, and the platform itself was a controlled chaos of families and owls and wobbling trolleys and children who hadn't seen each other in months. The noise level was considerable. Harry moved through it with the ease of someone who had spent 10 years in a place where nothing was ever really quiet. Gringotts had its own kind of constant noise, the hum of the deep stone, the distant rumble of carts, the scratch of hundreds of quills. He found a compartment, stowed his trunk, and sat down. The door opened within 3 minutes and a girl came in, bushy brown hair, bright brown eyes, the energetic manner of someone who was very excited and processing it by doing things efficiently. She had her robes on already, which no one else on the platform did. "Is it all right if I sit here? Everywhere else is filling up and I like to be settled before the train moves." She didn't pause for the answer, just swung her bag onto the rack above the seat with practiced efficiency. "I'm Hermione Granger. I'm Muggle-born, so I only found out I was a witch 2 months ago, which meant I had a lot of catching up to do and I think I've mostly managed it, but there's always more." She sat down and looked at him. "You've got a, oh. You're Harry Potter." "Yes," Harry said. She looked at him with the focused assessment of someone recalibrating. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "I don't know exactly." "Something more," she gestured vaguely. "The books make you sound like a myth. But you're just a person." "The books are mostly wrong," Harry said. "Which parts?" He liked her immediately. Not many people asked follow-up questions that fast. "The part where I was raised by Muggle relatives. The part where I had no knowledge of the magical world until I was 11. Essentially the backstory." Hermione looked interested in the way that people who are genuinely interested in things look interested, not politely, but hungrily. "Where were you actually raised?" "Gringotts." The silence that followed was more expressive than most sentences. "The bank," she said. "Yes. You were raised by goblins. Primarily by one goblin, Harry said. But in Gringotts, yes. Hermione looked at him for a long moment and then looked out the window at the platform, processing. That explains the not matching the books, then. She turned back. What was that like? The question was so simple and so direct that Harry almost smiled. Most people danced around the obvious questions, approached them sideways. Educational, he said. Honest. Occasionally complicated. He paused. The best thing I can say is that no one there ever told me something was true when it wasn't. The train began to move. The compartment door opened again. A boy with red hair that announced itself ahead of the rest of him stuck his head in and looked around with the helpless expression of someone who had started looking for a seat too late. Any room? Yes, Harry said. The red-headed boy came in and dropped into the seat with the comfortable bonelessness of someone who was used to moving through crowded spaces efficiently. He had a smear of something on his nose that looked like it had been there for hours and had been forgotten entirely. Ron Weasley, he said cheerfully. Harry Potter. Ron blinked. Did the same recalibration that Hermione had done, but his came with more visible gear changing. Blimey, he said, and then, immediately, because he was fundamentally a straightforward person, you look normal. I am normal, Harry said. Yeah, but, you know. The scar and everything. Ron gestured at his own forehead. Can I see it? Harry tilted his head forward slightly. Ron leaned in and looked with the unself-conscious curiosity of someone who had 6 siblings and had lost the capacity for embarrassment early. Cool, Ron said. Hermione looked like she was choosing not to comment on this exchange and being slightly strained by the effort. Hermione Granger, Harry said, introducing her to Ron in the comfortable way of someone who had decided they were all in this compartment together now and might as well make it formal. Muggle-born, Hermione added, which Ron absorbed without comment. They talked for an hour, easy, exploratory conversation, the kind that happens when people are figuring each other out without quite admitting that's what they're doing. Ron had 6 siblings and strong opinions about Quidditch. Hermione had read everything available about the magical world and was brisk and exact about facts but openly curious about gaps in her knowledge. Harry answered questions when asked and asked his own, and by the time the food trolley came past they had settled into a comfort with each other that felt like it had been going longer than an hour. What house do you think you'll be in? Ron asked, mouth half full of chocolate frogs. I don't know, Harry said honestly. Dad says most of our family's been in Gryffindor forever, Ron said. He'll probably be all right if I'm not, but Mum, he made a face. I want to be in Ravenclaw, Hermione said, in the tone of someone who has thought about this extensively and arrived at a considered conclusion. Or Gryffindor. Either. What about Slytherin? Harry asked. Ron made the same sound Sirius had made, except worse. It's a question, Harry said mildly. They're the worst, Ron said firmly. No offense if you end up there, obviously, but, you might find it's more complicated than that, Harry said, without any particular edge. Just the observation. Ron looked at him. You've really spent too much time with goblins. Probably, Harry agreed, entirely without offense, because it was true. The castle appeared out of the dark and the lake and the rain with the quality of something that had always been there waiting to be found, and Harry watched it come through the boat's spray and felt, without quite understanding it, that Sirius had been right. The castle knew things. The magic in it was old and it ran deep and it was paying attention. The boats hit the shore. They followed the enormous man with the lamp, Hagrid. Harry knew, Ragnarok had told him about Hagrid, the one who'd been sent to Godric's Hollow that night and arrived to find Harry already gone, up the path and through the side door into a corridor lit by torchlight, and then a professor met them. Professor McGonagall. Stern face, precise posture, tartan robes, the focused energy of someone who ran a tight operation and expected you to meet the standard. She looked at the assembled first years with the expression of someone assessing which of them were going to be trouble. Her eyes stopped on Harry for exactly 1 second. He saw it, the flicker of recognition and the decision not to show it. She moved on. "They're ready," she told Hagrid, and went back through the doors. The hall was extraordinary. Harry had read descriptions of it and the descriptions hadn't been wrong, exactly, but they hadn't conveyed the quality of being inside it, the scale, the candles floating in clusters above the 4 long house tables, the enchanted ceiling showing the cloud-heavy night sky, the collective weight of several hundred students turning to look at the first years coming through the doors. The noise level dropped as they walked in, not to silence but to a lower register, and Harry felt the attention come like a physical thing. He kept his pace exactly the same. The Sorting Hat sat on a stool at the front of the hall, ancient and shapeless and quietly observant, and McGonagall called the names one by one and they went up and sat down and the Hat either took a moment or decided immediately, and the tables cheered for each of their own. Granger, Hermione. The Hat considered. Then, Gryffindor. Hermione walked to the Gryffindor table with her chin up and her shoulders square and looked exactly like she belonged there. Potter, Harry. The hall changed. Not dramatically. No gasps, no standing up. But the quality of the attention sharpened from general curiosity to something more focused, and Harry walked to the stool through it without changing anything about how he moved. He sat down. McGonagall placed the hat on his head. Darkness. And then a voice. Well. Quiet, dry, interested. The Hat sounded, Harry thought, like it had been doing this for 1,000 years and had just found something it hadn't seen in a while. Harry Potter. The Ledgers sent you, didn't they? You're nothing like what they expected. What did they expect? Harry thought back. A frightened boy. Grateful for any place that would take him. A pause, interior, ruminative. Instead I have someone who has read every available text on magical contract law and knows 12 goblin combat forms and has opinions about Wisengamot procedural reform. You are 11 years old. Yes. Where do you want to go? Wherever is most useful. Harry thought for a moment. Honest answer, wherever I can do the most from. Gryffindor has tradition and Dumbledore's trust. Slytherin has the political network. Ravenclaw has the minds. Hufflepuff has the loyalty. He considered. I want to be able to move in all of them. You can't be in all of them. No. But who I am in one will shape how I'm seen in the others. I know that. The Hat made a sound that was approximately a laugh. Your father didn't negotiate with me like this. I'm not my father. No, the Hat agreed. You're not. A pause. But you have his nerve, and your mother's mind, and something that's entirely your own that I haven't had to sort in 400 years. A beat. The place that needs you most, and where you'll do the most, and where the sorting will mean something beyond just the tradition, Gryffindor. The Gryffindor table cheered. Harry took the hat off, handed it back to McGonagall, who took it with an expression that gave nothing away, and walked to the table and sat down next to Hermione, who moved her bag and said, "Took a while." "We had a conversation," Harry said. She looked delighted by this. "What kind of conversation?" "The Hat asks where you want to go," Harry said. "I told it my reasoning." "It let you make a case." "More or less." Ron came up 2 names later, went to Gryffindor in about 4 seconds, and dropped into the seat across from them with enormous relief. "Mum will be happy," he said. Then, to Harry, "You took ages." "So I'm told," Harry said. After dinner, when the first years were being led to the Gryffindor common room by the prefects, Dumbledore caught Harry in the entrance hall. Not stopped him, nothing as direct as that. He simply appeared from a side corridor with the practiced timing of someone who had arranged to be in a particular place at a particular moment, and smiled the warm smile, and said, "Harry. Welcome to Hogwarts." Harry stopped. Looked at him. Ragnarok had been right, the warmth was real, technically. Dumbledore genuinely was pleased by things and genuinely did care, in his way. The problem wasn't the warmth. The problem was what it was carrying. Professor Dumbledore, Harry said. I've been looking forward to meeting you properly for many years, Dumbledore said. I knew your parents well. Remarkable people. I know, Harry said. Sirius tells me about them. Something shifted in Dumbledore's expression. Very small. Sirius, he said. Yes. How is, he's well, Harry said. Better than when he came out of Azkaban. Significantly better than when he went in. A pause, light as a feather, carrying the exact weight he intended. Did you want to show me to the common room? I don't want to get separated from the others. A beat. Dumbledore smiled. Of course. Though you'll find the prefects quite capable, they are, Harry agreed pleasantly. Good evening, Professor. He walked on. He heard nothing behind him for a moment, and then the soft sound of Dumbledore moving away in a different direction. Harry turned the corner into the corridor where the other Gryffindors were clustered around the prefect, and Ron fell into step beside him. Was that Dumbledore? Ron said. Yes. What did he want? To establish something, Harry said. What? Harry looked ahead at the torchlit corridor. He wanted to see what he was dealing with. Now he knows. Ron opened his mouth. Closed it. You're a bit strange, you know that. I've been told, Harry said. The common room was exactly as described, warm, red and gold, fire in the hearth, squashy armchairs, the comfortable cluttered energy of a room that had been well used for a very long time. The castle, Harry thought, was doing what Sirius had said. It had opened this room to him in a way that was slightly different from just unlocking a door. He could feel it in the stone, the faint hum of old magic recognizing something. He sat by the fire and looked around at this new world. The other first years were sorting themselves naturally. Ron had found 2 other boys, Neville Longbottom and Dean Thomas, and they were already talking Quidditch. Hermione had produced a book from somewhere and was reading with a focused contentment that suggested the evening's events had been satisfying, but she was ready for something quieter. The older years mostly ignored the first years except for a few curious glances at Harry, which he met without particular interest. A girl dropped into the chair next to him. She had dirty blonde hair and large, silvery eyes that looked at things from slightly unexpected angles, and she was reading a magazine upside down with the serene confidence of someone who had made a deliberate choice and didn't feel the need to defend it. She was in Ravenclaw robes, which meant she'd somehow ended up in the Gryffindor common room, which should have required the password, and Harry found this detail interesting. You're in Ravenclaw, he said. Yes, she said, still reading the upside-down magazine. This is Gryffindor Tower. I know. The staircases are very cooperative if you ask them nicely. She turned a page. I wanted to meet you before tomorrow, when everyone will be trying to meet you and making it a whole thing. Much easier now. Harry looked at her. Luna Lovegood, she said, as if remembering that she hadn't introduced herself. My father runs the Quibbler. You might have heard of it. I have, Harry said. The Quibbler was considered eccentric, occasionally outright wrong, and entirely uncontrolled by any of the usual political pressures. Ragnarok read it with a kind of dry appreciation. Your father reported on the Gringotts audit. Luna looked up from her magazine properly then, for the first time, and looked at him with eyes that saw things clearly from slightly unusual angles. He did. He was very interested in the story. Most papers wouldn't touch it. She paused. I think that's why the Nargles kept eating his quills for a month afterward. Harry considered whether to ask about Nargles and decided to let it pass for now. What did you want to say before tomorrow makes everything complicated? Just to look at you, Luna said simply. The papers have been writing about who you are for 10 years and none of them have actually met you. I wanted to see what you're actually like. And? You're quieter than I expected, she said. And you pay attention in a way that most people don't. You're not performing being Harry Potter, you're just, she tilted her head slightly, being yourself. Which is much harder than it sounds, particularly with everyone watching. I've been myself for 11 years, Harry said. It's not very difficult. For you, Luna said. Most people don't know who they are at 11. Or 30, actually. She picked up her magazine again. I think we're going to be friends. Harry thought about this. Probably, he said. The Sorting Hat took a long time with you. We talked. I know. It used to talk to me too. The hat has opinions. She turned another upside-down page. It told me I was the most unusual Ravenclaw it had sorted since someone in 1312 whose name it couldn't pronounce. Is that a compliment? Everything is a compliment if you decide it is, Luna said serenely. He saw Dumbledore properly for the first time as a teacher's figure the next morning at breakfast, when the post arrived. The owls came with the morning, a wide sweep of them over the Gryffindor table, dropping packages and letters and the daily papers. Harry got 3 letters, one from Ragnarok, written in the economical style of someone who considered words a currency to be spent carefully, confirming that the legal team had filed the estate recovery paperwork as planned. One from Sirius, considerably longer, asking about the sorting and the food and whether the Quidditch pitch was as good as he remembered and whether Harry had found his robes uncomfortable because James had found his robes uncomfortable for the whole first year. And one with a ministry seal that he turned over and read carefully. It was from Amelia Bone's office. A notification, formal, dry, legal language, that the Black Potter estate civil case had been registered with the Wisingamot and that a preliminary hearing date had been set for November. He folded this one deliberately and put it in his inner pocket and looked up. Dumbledore was at the head table, talking to Professor Flitwick. But he was not entirely attending to Flitwick. A portion of his attention was on Harry with the precision of a man who had learned to watch things sideways, without appearing to watch them. Harry met his gaze for exactly 1 second before Dumbledore looked fully back at Flitwick. Letter from home? Ron asked, through a mouthful of toast. Several, Harry said. Your goblin guardian? Ragnarok. And Sirius. He paused. And the ministry. Ron blinked. Why is the ministry writing to you on your first morning at Hogwarts? Legal notification, Harry said. Ron looked at Hermione in the way that people look at a third party when they suspect they're missing context. Hermione looked back at him in the way of someone who also had questions but was prioritizing breakfast. Okay, Ron said. He went back to his toast. Harry looked up at the head table again. Dumbledore's expression, to anyone looking at it from the outside, was the same warm, benign attention it always was. But Harry had spent 10 years learning to read things that didn't want to be read, goblin financial documents, clause-heavy legal texts, the faces of beings who were 300 years old and had gotten very good at keeping their expressions informative only to themselves. Dumbledore had just been served papers on the case. Harry watched the stillness in the old man's face and recognized it because he had seen Ragnarok do the same thing, the particular discipline of someone absorbing bad news in a public space and making sure none of it showed. He ate his breakfast. Classes were interesting. Not all of them, some of them were structured for students with no prior magical training and those moved too slowly for someone who had been practicing wand work since he was 6, supervised by the 2 senior bank wizards Gringotts kept on retainer for magical maintenance. Transfiguration moved fast enough under McGonagall to be worth paying attention to. Defense against the dark arts was theoretically interesting and practically limited by the fact that Quirrell, the current teacher, appeared to be running on approximately 40% of his available focus and the rest seemed to be occupied by something else entirely. Harry noticed this on the first day and filed it. Charms was what he enjoyed most. Flitwick was small, precise, and genuinely expert, and he taught with the clarity of someone who understood magic from the inside rather than just the rules. The first lesson was the Wingardium Leviosa charm, which Harry performed on the second attempt, which drew a pleased comment from Flitwick and a mildly competitive look from Hermione, who performed it on the third. Potions was Snape. Severus Snape was tall, dark-haired, and moved through his dungeons with the attitude of someone who regarded the world as a disappointment that was, unfortunately, unavoidable. He started the first lesson by taking the register, arrived at Harry's name, paused with the specific quality of a pause that had been prepared in advance, and said, "Ah. Mr. Potter. Our new celebrity." Harry looked at him steadily. "Can you tell me," Snape continued, turning to face the class while clearly addressing Harry specifically, "what you would get if you added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood?" "Draught of living death," Harry said. "It's mentioned in most patendi potions, but the actual preparation requires a modified stirring sequence that the standard texts don't cover accurately. 7 clockwise, pause, 7 counter, pause, the standard instruction of 5 and 5 produces an unstable compound." Snape looked at him. The quality of the look was very slightly recalibrated. "And where would you look if I told you to find me a bezoar?" Snape said, with slightly less of the performance in it. "Stomach of a goat. They're a standard antidote for most poisons, and they're in the base materials cabinet of any properly stocked potions classroom." He glanced at the cabinet in the corner. "You have 3 of them." Another recalibration. "What is the difference between monkshood and wolfsbane?" Snape said, and now he sounded like he was actually asking. "They're the same plant. Aconitum. Also called aconite. Different names are used in different contexts, wolfsbane in the context of werewolf-related potions, monkshood in standard classification." He paused. "Though there are 11 distinct species of aconitum with meaningfully different magical properties, and the distinction matters in advanced preparation." Snape looked at him for a long moment. The class was very quiet. Evidently, Snape said, fame isn't everything. He turned back to the board. "Today we are covering basic," that was unambiguously a compliment, Ron whispered. "I know," Harry said at the same volume. "From Snape." "Yes." Ron shook his head slowly. Strange days. He found the library on the second afternoon and spent an hour in the restricted section, which he accessed by virtue of the fact that the door was poorly warded and responded to a straightforward unlocking charm, and he spent about 3 seconds considering whether not to before deciding that he wasn't here to be restricted by a door. He wasn't looking for anything specific. He was mapping, the way he'd mapped Gringotts as a child, learning the shape of the place, what was where, what the classification system said about what the institution valued. The restricted section had the expected dark magic texts and curse references, some genuinely dangerous, and also a substantial collection of political history that wasn't restricted for content reasons but had been, at some point, removed from the general stacks. He pulled a few and read the relevant sections standing at the shelves. He was there about 40 minutes when the door opened and McGonagall came in. She looked at him with the expression she'd given the first years on the platform, the brief, precise assessment that sorted the world into categories rapidly. Then she said, "You should have a teacher's permission to be in here." "Yes," Harry agreed. "You don't have a teacher's permission." "No." "What are you reading?" He held it up. Wisingamot Procedural History, 1800 to 1950. McGonagall looked at the spine. Something happened in her expression, a fraction of recalibration similar to Snape's but with different architecture. "That is not usually what first years come in here for." "I know," Harry said. "Can I borrow it?" McGonagall was quiet for a moment. Then, "If you replace it and you don't damage it, I will not have seen you here tonight." "Thank you, Professor." She looked at him one more time with the expression of someone who had expected one thing and received another and was not sure yet whether this was better or worse. "Good evening, Mr. Potter." "Good evening." She left. Harry put the book under his arm and went back to the common room. Luna found him on the grounds the following Sunday morning, when the castle was quiet and the September light was doing things to the lake that deserved more attention than they usually got. She appeared from behind a tree without particular announcement and fell into step beside him with the ease of someone who had decided they were already friends and was acting on that without waiting for formal confirmation. She was carrying a copy of the Quibbler, which she was reading while walking, which should have been more dangerous than it appeared to be. "Your case made the front page," she said, handing it over. He took it. The headline read, "Gringotts Files Against Dumbledore, the Potter Estate and What the Ledgers Know." His father's byline was there, Xenophilius Lovegood, the article dense and specific in citing documents that could only have come from a careful source inside the legal process. "Ragnarok authorized this," Harry said. "My father's been talking to him since the audit," Luna confirmed. "He says Ragnarok is very precise about what he shares and when." "He is," Harry said. He read the article while they walked, which was easier than it should have been because Luna was perfectly comfortable with people reading in her company and didn't attempt to fill the silence. By noon, the article had been read by half the school. By dinner, it had been read by all of it. The hall was louder than usual. There were looks, many directed at him, some at the head table. Dumbledore ate his dinner with the same measured calm he always did, but Harry noticed he didn't speak to any of the other professors during the meal, which was unusual. Ron had the Quibbler flat on the table between his plate and Hermione's, and they were both reading it in the way that people read things they're half excited and half uncertain about. "This is real," Ron said. "Dumbledore actually, the documents are real," Harry said. "The bank keeps records that can't be altered. That's the whole point of Gringotts." "But he's Dumbledore," Ron said, "not as a defense, exactly. More as a statement of how fundamentally the world had just been reorganized." "Yes," Harry said. "He defeated Grindelwald," Hermione said quietly. "He built the Order of the Phoenix. He's in every book, he's one person doing several things," Harry said. "Some of them good. Some of them not." He looked at his food. "Good people can do wrong things. Particularly when they're convinced they're doing them for right reasons." Hermione looked at him with something sharp and considering. "You're not angry about it," she said. It wasn't quite a question. "I've had 10 years to be angry about it," Harry said. "I did that part already. Now it's just," he paused, "a problem to solve." He looked up at the head table. Dumbledore was looking at him. Not the sideways look from before, direct, this time, clear-eyed, the real look of the most brilliant wizard of the age taking the full measure of the child he'd underestimated for a decade. Harry held his gaze. After a moment, Dumbledore looked away. Chapter 4, What Dumbledore built. The first Quidditch practice of the season happened on a Thursday evening when the sky couldn't decide between sunset and storm and settled on both simultaneously, painting the pitch in orange and bruised purple while the wind made itself everyone's problem. Harry had no broom. He had, however, watched from the stands for 40 minutes while the Gryffindor team ran drills, which Forgehammer had taught him was the correct way to understand any new system: observe first, assess the patterns, identify the gaps, then move. The team had 3 solid chasers, a keeper who was reliable under low pressure and unreliable under high, 2 beaters who compensated for each other's weaknesses effectively, and no seeker. The previous seeker had graduated. The tryout notice on the common room board had been there since the second day of term. Oliver Wood found him in the stands after practice. Wood was a 6th year with the particular intensity of someone who had reorganized his personality entirely around a sport and was comfortable with this. He had watched Harry watching practice with the focused attention of someone building a case, and he came up the stands with the directness of someone who had already made a decision and just needed the other party to confirm it. "You've been watching every practice," Wood said. "Yes," Harry said. "Can you fly?" "I've flown brooms 3 times, Harry said. "At Gringotts. The maintenance team keeps 2 for the ward's inspection. I flew with them when I was 8, 9, and 10. He paused. "I'm good." Wood looked at him with the evaluating focus that he gave everything related to Quidditch. "First years aren't allowed their own brooms," Harry said. "I know. That doesn't affect whether I can fly." "Come down to the pitch," Wood said. "Tomorrow morning. Before breakfast. I'll have a school broom for you." Harry looked at the sky. "All right." He was on the pitch at 6:30. Wood was already there with a Nimbus 1000 and a snitch and the barely controlled energy of someone who had not slept particularly well because they were too focused on what the morning might produce. Harry picked up the broom, ran his hand along the shaft once, then mounted and pushed off. The first 10 seconds were the reassessment, the feel of this particular broom, its response time, the sensitivity of the steering, how it moved in the wind, which was brisk and coming northeast. By the second 10 seconds he had calibrated it. By 30 seconds he had pushed it to full speed down the length of the pitch and back and felt exactly where its limits were and where his weren't. Wood, on the ground, had gone very still. Harry pulled up into a hover 60 feet above the pitch, where the air moved differently and you could see the whole space spread out below, and looked at the pitch the way he looked at everything, as a system with patterns that could be understood. Then Wood released the snitch. It was a practiced release, designed to test reaction rather than give an advantage, the snitch shooting upward and angling northeast with the wind. Harry tracked it for 2 seconds, the arc, the speed, the drift in the crosswind, then went after it. He caught it at the far end of the pitch in 43 seconds, pulling out of a steep dive that brought him within 5 feet of the ground and leveling off with the snitch closed in his right hand, fingers feeling the flutter of the tiny wings before they stilled. He landed. Wood was staring at him. "You said you'd flown 3 times, Wood said. "On brooms," Harry said. "I've always been good at moving fast." He held up the snitch. "Do you want to run it again?" Wood said nothing for 4 full seconds. "Then, you're our seeker." Said it the way you'd state a law of physics. "McGonagall's going to have to give me an exception to the first-year rule and she's going to hate it, but she's going to do it because I will show her what I just saw." "I don't mind either way," Harry said, which was true. He had come down because Wood had asked and he was curious, and now he was mildly interested in Quidditch as a physical problem, but he wasn't attached to the outcome. This appeared to perplex Wood in some fundamental way. "You just caught that snitch in 43 seconds, Wood said." 43 is a rough estimate, Harry said. "You're not excited?" Harry considered the question honestly. "I'd like to do it again," he said. "And again after that. And I'd like to fly in an actual match and see what it's like when someone is trying to stop you." He looked at the snitch. "That part sounds interesting." Wood took the snitch back from him with the reverence of someone handling a confirmation of something they'd hoped for. "Right," he said. "Right. McGonagall. Today. Come with me." McGonagall watched the demonstration on the pitch at lunchtime with her arms folded and an expression of controlled conflict, the teacher who believed in rules fighting the former Quidditch player who was watching something extraordinary. After 2 runs and a particularly violent dive that ended in a pull-out so late that Wood made a small involuntary sound, she unfolded her arms and said, "I will need to consult the rules about first-year exceptions." "I already looked them up," Harry said. "There's a clause in the school charter. It's been used twice before. 1879 and 1943. Both were seeker positions." McGonagall looked at him for a moment with the expression she was developing specifically for Harry, which was different from the expression she used on everyone else. It contained the same steel, but it also contained something that looked, from certain angles, almost like respect. "Where did you find the school charter?" "Library," Harry said. "It's not in general circulation." "No," Harry agreed pleasantly. Another beat. Then McGonagall said, "You'll need a proper broom." "I have one," Harry said. "My godfather sent it last week. I've been keeping it in the dormitory." Wood, who had not known about the broom, looked briefly betrayed and then focused. "What is it?" "Nimbus 2000, Harry said. Wood made a sound like a prayer being answered. The legal case became the defining noise of October. The preliminary hearing before the Wisengamot happened on the 14th, and Harry was not present. You didn't need to be present for preliminary hearings, and he had a transfiguration class and found the symbolism of continuing his education more interesting than sitting in a courtroom, but Goldthorne attended and filed the primary evidence package and the hearing was, by all accounts, a controlled demolition. The documents were entered into the official record. The vault drainage figures. The false custodial claim. The Black Estate Restriction Order and its fraudulent legal basis. The invisibility cloak transfer. Every irregularity that the audit had surfaced, now translated into formal legal language and stamped with the Gringotts seal that meant the records were magically verified and incontestable. Dumbledore was present. He had a lawyer, a good one, Ragnock mentioned in his weekly letter, the best in magical Britain. The lawyer argued procedural points carefully and bought time where time was buyable, but the documents were what they were and the Gringotts seal couldn't be challenged on the merits, and everyone in the room understood where this was heading. The main hearing was set for January. The Prophet ran it on the front page the following morning: Dumbledore faces Wizengamot on Potter estate charges. Beside it, a smaller headline: Chief Warlock's position under review. The common room at breakfast was electric. Harry sat at his usual spot with Ron on his left and Hermione on his right and felt the attention on him from every direction, not just Gryffindor, all 4 tables, and ate his eggs. "Does it bother you?" Hermione asked quietly. "Having it all in public like this?" "No," Harry said. "It needs to be public. Private processes are easier to bury." He turned a page of the Prophet. Ragnock made sure the Quibbler had everything first, before the Prophet, so the Prophet couldn't shape the story. By the time they ran it, the record was already established. Hermione looked at him. "You planned that with him?" "We talked about the information strategy, yes." She was quiet for a moment. "You're very comfortable with all of this?" "The legal case, the strategy. Most people your age would find it overwhelming," Harry said. "I was going to say unusual." "It's not unusual to me," Harry said. "I grew up in a bank. The first thing Ragnock taught me was that information and documentation are how power gets exercised in the long run. Not spells. Not force. The ledger outlasts the wand." He paused. "He's been very patient about explaining how it all works." "He sounds like a remarkable person," Hermione said. Harry thought about Ragnock, 300 years old, copper-colored eyes, the voice that carried everything without raising. The morning with the toast, the afternoon with the counting coins, the night he'd sat up with Harry until 2 in the morning working through the distinction between civil and criminal proceedings in wizarding law because Harry had a question and Ragnock didn't believe in incomplete answers. "He is," Harry said simply. Ron, who had been reading the Prophet over Harry's shoulder, said, "The article says Dumbledore might have to step down as Chief Warlock." "Yes. Can he still be headmaster?" "Those are separate roles," Harry said. "The headmaster position isn't a Wizengamot appointment. The Board of Governors would have to act on that separately." "Do you want him to lose the headmaster position?" Ron asked. It was a direct question delivered in the direct way Ron asked most things, which Harry found refreshing. "I want the estate restored and the legal record corrected," Harry said. "What happens to his positions afterward is for the appropriate bodies to decide." He looked at the article again. "Honestly, I think he's a better headmaster than most of what would replace him. That doesn't make what he did acceptable." Ron chewed this over along with his toast. "That's a very grown-up position," he said finally. "I've had a lot of time to think about it," Harry said. Defense against the dark arts deteriorated through October. Quirrell had started badly and gotten worse. His classroom had a smell that Harry had noticed on the first day, something layered under the garlic that Quirrell wore, something that the part of Harry's magic that had been educated by 5 years of goblin security training reacted to with a persistent low-grade alarm. He'd mentioned it to Forgehammer in a letter and Forgehammer had written back 2 things: first, that dark magic had an olfactory signature that varied by tradition but was generally detectable to magically sensitive individuals, and second, a very concise 3-word response that Harry had read several times: "Do not investigate." He was investigating anyway, because not investigating something dangerous in your immediate environment was not a principle he had any patience for. He sat in defense class on a Tuesday in late October and watched Quirrell fumble through a lesson on counterjinxes and paid attention to the wrong layer of it, not the content, which he already knew, but the texture of the magic in the room. There was a doubling to it. Quirrell's own magic and something else, something darker and hungrier, running underneath like a current under ice. He shared this observation with Hermione and Ron that evening. Hermione's first response was that he should report it to a teacher. Her second response, after approximately 30 seconds of thinking it through, was that reporting it to a teacher meant either McGonagall, who would then involve Dumbledore, or Dumbledore directly, and Harry had some reason to be cautious about what he brought to Dumbledore. Her third response was silence while she worked out what she thought. "The thing about the smell," Ron said, with his knees pulled up on the common room armchair and a chess piece in his hand that he'd been about to move and forgotten about. "That's dark magic." "Something dark," Harry said. "Not necessarily the same kind. He paused, looking for the right words. "You know how Gringotts has that deep stone smell? And it's always the same because it's coming from something very old and stable. This is the opposite of that. It's like something that should be stable isn't." "Voldemort isn't dead," Hermione said quietly. Both of them looked at her. "He was weakened, not destroyed," she said, in the manner of someone who has read extensively and is now applying it. "Every source agrees on that. He lost his body but his essence, or whatever you'd call it, didn't end. If he's been looking for a way to return," she stopped. "Started again. A possessed host would be detectable to someone sensitive enough. The two magical signatures would be distinct." Harry thought about this. The thing under the ice. Two currents. "Quirrell," he said. "That's what I'm thinking," Hermione said. Ron looked between them. "Right," he said. "Right. So our defense against the dark arts teacher is being used as a host body by a disembodied dark wizard." He put the chess piece down. "At what point does this become something we tell an adult?" "When I've confirmed it," Harry said. "And when I've decided which adult." "You're going to get close enough to confirm it," Ron said. "Yes. Without setting off whatever is in there." "Yes." Ron looked at him with the expression he was developing for Harry-related situations that were beyond the normal scope of being 11. "You know what I said about being 11 for at least a week?" "You said I should try to be 11 for a week," Harry said. "That was serious, actually." "Well, whichever of you said it, it clearly didn't take." November brought cold and rain and the first Quidditch match. Gryffindor versus Slytherin, mid-month, and the castle turned out in full. The stands were packed and the morning was sharp and bright and Harry felt it in his chest the way he felt physical challenges, not nerves, exactly, more the tightening of focus that happened before something required everything. He'd been flying every available morning for 2 months. He knew the pitch in 8 different weather conditions and at 3 different times of day. The Slytherin seeker was a second-year named Marcus Bell, older and heavier and with the practiced air of someone who had been told he was excellent and had decided to believe it. He looked at Harry across the pitch during the captain's handshake with the evaluating look of someone expecting an easy win. Harry looked back with no expression at all, which seemed to disconcert Bell more than a challenging look would have. Madam Hooch released the balls. The match started. The first 10 minutes Harry spent in a wide patrol pattern high above the pitch, above the main play, using the altitude to see the whole field, tracking the snitch's characteristic movement patterns. It had gone south initially and then adjusted. It was near the Slytherin goal posts, hovering at about 20 feet, blending with the green and silver of the Slytherin banners. Bell hadn't found it. He was doing close loops of the pitch at mid-height, the standard pattern for a seeker who was looking without having a specific read. Trained habit, not active tracking. Harry waited. 2 minutes. The snitch moved north, drifting, then adjusted east, toward the Gryffindor stands. Bell hadn't seen it. Harry angled his broom nose down in a degree that looked casual and wasn't, and waited until he had the angle right, and then went. The dive was vertical for 20 feet and then angled, 60 miles an hour and climbing, the wind in his face with that particular pressure that meant you were at the edge of the broom's tolerance and working with it rather than against it. Belle saw him go and reacted, but reacting to a direction isn't the same as knowing where you're going, and Harry had 3 seconds on him. He caught it at 12 feet off the ground, pulling up hard, and had the snitch closed in his fist before Belle had covered half the pitch. The roar from the Gryffindor stand was something physical. Harry held the snitch up and felt it flutter in his closed hand and thought, for a moment, about the first time he'd caught it in the practice sessions, the same flutter, the same weight, the tiny mechanism of a thing that had been made to be chased, and felt a clean satisfaction that had no performance in it. Wood landed beside him screaming something that included the words glorious and never and professional team. Harry let him shout. In the stands, he could see Ron standing on his seat. He could see Hermione, who was cheering with the unguarded delight of someone who had been studying Quidditch rules for 3 weeks specifically so she could understand what she was watching. He could see Luna, in the Ravenclaw section, not cheering but watching him with the clear, attentive look she always had, a small smile at the edge of her mouth. In the teachers section, Dumbledore was applauding with the warmth he brought to everything. But his eyes on Harry had the quality of someone watching a chess piece move in an unexpected direction and recalculating the board. The conversation with Dumbledore happened the following week. Not in the entrance hall this time. A request, delivered through McGonagall, for Harry to come to the headmaster's office after dinner. Please, not must. The please was its own message. Harry went. The office was exactly what it needed to be, not ostentatious but accumulated, full of a life's worth of objects with histories, the instruments ticking and chiming, portraits of previous headmasters watching from the walls. The phoenix on the perch looked at Harry with round, steady eyes as he came in, and Harry paused and looked back, and the phoenix made a low sound, not the full soaring song but something quieter. Fawkes likes very few people, Dumbledore said. He was standing by the window with a cup of tea, and offered one to Harry, who accepted it and sat in the chair across from the desk. She has good judgment then, Harry said. Dumbledore sat. I wanted to talk to you, he said, without preamble, which Harry noted as a shift in approach. No more entrance hall warmth. This was more honest, which made it more interesting. Not as your headmaster, exactly. As someone who knew your parents and who has, I think you know, a complicated relationship with your history. Yes, Harry said. I think that's fair. Dumbledore looked at him. You're not what I expected. People keep saying that. I imagine they do. Dumbledore set his cup down. I want to say something to you directly, Harry, if you'll allow it. Go ahead. What I did, Dumbledore paused, and it was a genuine pause, the kind that meant something was being carefully chosen and not just performed. The vault withdrawals. The Black Estate restriction. The cloak. I have a justification for each of those decisions. I believed they were necessary. I believed I was managing resources for a larger purpose, the ongoing fight against Voldemort, the protection of people who had no one else to protect them, the building of structures that would survive the war. He held Harry's gaze. But I also know that justification is not the same as correctness. I made those decisions about your life without asking you. Without giving you or your family the right to consent or refuse. He paused again. I was wrong to do that. Harry looked at him for a long moment. He believed him. That was the complicated thing. He believed that Dumbledore believed everything he'd just said, the justification, the acknowledgement, all of it. The man was not lying. He was telling his true version of events, and his true version was internally consistent and morally serious, and also, underneath it, still carrying the assumption that Albus Dumbledore was ultimately the correct person to have made those decisions. I appreciate you saying that, Harry said. I mean that genuinely. Most people in your position would have spent the whole conversation on justification alone. But? Dumbledore said. But the question isn't whether you had reasons. The question is whether the reasons made it yours to decide. Harry looked at him steadily. My parents were alive when you started withdrawing from the vaults. They were your friends. Did you tell them what you were doing? The silence that followed was its own answer. No, Dumbledore said quietly. Because you knew they'd say no, Harry said. Another silence. Because I thought I knew better, Dumbledore said, and the honesty of it was painful, the specific pain of someone hearing themselves clearly for the first time. The legal case is going to proceed, Harry said. I want you to know that I'm not doing it out of anger. I'm doing it because the record needs to be corrected and the money needs to go where it belongs and the framework that let it happen needs to be changed so it can't happen to someone else. He picked up his tea. But I don't hate you. You're complicated. Most important people are. Dumbledore looked at him with an expression that Harry couldn't fully categorize, something between grief and something that was almost, despite everything, pride. Your mother argued like that, Dumbledore said. Evidence over emotion. Position over personal feeling. James was all fire. Lily was the blade. He paused. You have both of them in you. I know, Harry said. And something else that's entirely you. Dumbledore looked at the ticking instruments on the shelves. I've made many mistakes in my life, Harry. Some of them I'm still understanding the shape of. But I want you to know that my original intent, the protection of the magical world, the preservation of what's worth preserving, I have not abandoned that. Even if my methods were wrong. I know, Harry said again. That's not in question. He set his cup down. Voldemort is not finished. The shift in the room was immediate. No, Dumbledore said carefully. He is not. Quirrell, Harry said. Dumbledore was still for exactly 1 second, the stillness of someone who knew something and is deciding how much to confirm. Then, what makes you say that? I can feel 2 magical signatures in that room, Harry said. My own sensitivity is higher than average, Grimtooth documented it from infancy. Dark magic has a specific quality. Quirrell has it and it isn't his. He looked at Dumbledore. There's something in the 3rd-floor corridor. The Cerberus. Whatever's under the trapdoor. Dumbledore looked at him with eyes that were recalculating things at speed. How do you know about the trapdoor? I listen, Harry said. And I walk around at night sometimes. Without your cloak, since I still have, Dumbledore stopped. I have other methods, Harry said pleasantly. A pause. The object being guarded, Dumbledore said carefully, is the Philosopher's Stone. Voldemort is attempting to use Quirrell to obtain it. The stone would allow him to create a physical body. He paused. I have protections in place. I know. I went past the first 2 last Tuesday. Harry held the headmaster's gaze. They're good. They're not enough if the person attempting them knows what they're doing. Dumbledore looked at him. You went past my protections. I wanted to understand the situation, Harry said. I can be more useful knowing than not knowing. He leaned forward slightly. Here's what I think, Voldemort can't get the stone himself. He needs Quirrell. Quirrell is getting worse, his control over Quirrell is increasing and it's going to break something in the next few months, maybe sooner. When that breaks, he makes his move. He paused. What's your plan? Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment. The ticking instruments filled the silence. The Phoenix watched from her perch. I was planning to move the stone, Dumbledore said finally. When? When I was certain the threat was imminent. December, Harry said. At the latest. Quirrell's deterioration will be visible to any half-attentive observer within another 6 weeks. He paused. Move it before Christmas. Take Quirrell out of the school, send him on leave, find a medical reason, whatever is cleanest. Remove the target and the vector at the same time. Dumbledore looked at him, really looked at him, the full weight of it. You're 11 years old, Dumbledore said. Not as a challenge. More like something he was reminding himself of. Yes, Harry said. And I was raised by someone who taught me that the right solution is usually the one that removes the problem cleanest with the fewest moving parts. Ragnarok calls it reducing exposure. He paused. The version where Voldemort gets to Quirrell, gets to the stone, and I have to deal with a confrontation in the third-floor corridor is a worse solution than the version where you remove the stone before it gets that far. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. You said the confrontation in the corridor. As if you assumed it would be you. Wouldn't it? Harry said. The phoenix made a soft sound. In the version I was building, Dumbledore said slowly, yes. You would have faced him. Found him. Defeated him. He paused. Alone. Frightened. Not understanding why it had to be you. And in that version, Harry said, what did you learn about whether I'd survive it? Silence. Not enough, Dumbledore said quietly. Move the stone, Harry said. Before Christmas. The stone was moved on the 15th of December. Harry knew because the atmosphere in the corridor changed, the Cerberus was still there, but the layered protection spells beneath the trapdoor had been taken down, and the specific quality of dark alertness that he'd felt from the third floor for 2 months eased overnight. Whatever Quirrell had been reaching toward wasn't there anymore. Quirrell went on medical leave the following Monday. Profuse apologies to his students, a substitute arranged for the remaining term, and an official statement about a recurring illness that read, to Harry's eyes, like very careful legal language written by someone who needed to cover several facts at once. He wrote to Ragnarok, stone moved. Vector removed. Threat reduced but not eliminated. Voldemort without a body remains Voldemort, he'll find another approach. Ragnarok wrote back within the day, agreed. Prepare accordingly. Not through fear, through knowledge. Tell me if you need anything. Harry folded the letter and put it in the box under his bed with the others. Christmas at Hogwarts was quiet in the way that large places go quiet when most of their population leaves, the scale of the emptiness more noticeable than it would be in a smaller place. Harry stayed. Ron stayed because it was easier than traveling, which Harry suspected was more about money than he mentioned. Hermione went home to her parents. On Christmas morning Harry came down to the common room and found a stack of gifts by the fireplace and, on top of it, a parcel he recognized, Ragnarok's packaging, precise and neat, with the Gringotts seal pressed into the wax. Inside was a book, not a published one, a handmade one, bound in dark leather, with a note in Ragnarok's handwriting tucked into the front cover. A record of the Potter and Black family histories, compiled from the vault archives, the Gringotts genealogy files, and the legal documents of the estate. You should know where you come from. Not as a burden, as information. Harry sat by the fire and read it for 2 hours. Ron appeared mid-morning with a mince pie in each hand and sat across from him without asking what he was reading, which Harry appreciated. He read. Ron ate. The fire burned. After a while Ron said, without looking up from the Quidditch magazine he'd acquired from somewhere, is it good? Yes, Harry said. He turned a page. His great-grandmother Doria Potter, née Black, who had apparently been a formidable duelist and had once thrown a vase at a ministry official who'd come to her home uninvited. His grandfather Fleamont Potter, who'd made the family fortune with Sleekeasy's hair potion and donated the majority of it to a St. Mungo's ward for werewolves. Lily Evans, Muggle-born, daughter of a schoolteacher in Cokeworth, who had been offered an apprenticeship with 4 different potions masters and turned them all down because she wanted to fight in the war. He read that last entry twice. Happy Christmas, Ron said. Happy Christmas, Harry said, and turned the page. Sirius came for 2 days after Christmas, bringing a bottle of something from a magical distillery in Scotland that he and Ragnarok apparently had opinions about. The 3 of them sat around a fire in a room Ragnarok had rented above the leaky cauldron. Ragnarok rarely left Gringotts for extended periods, but he made the trip for Christmas, and ate a meal that Sirius had cooked with the unpredictable enthusiasm of someone who had learned to cook in self-defense during the war years and had strong opinions about the correct way to roast a chicken. Harry sat between them at the small table and watched them disagree with each other about something to do with an investment and felt something he didn't have an exact word for, the warmth of specific people in a specific room, the unrepeatable quality of a particular collection of things. He was not sentimental by nature. But he recognized the thing when he was in it. "You're quiet," Sirius said, pointing a fork at him. "I'm watching you argue," Harry said. "We're not arguing," Ragnock said. "You absolutely are," Harry said. "You've been arguing about that account since October." "We have a difference of opinion," Ragnock said. "About the same account." Repeatedly. Harry looked between them. "Sirius thinks you should reinvest in magical manufacturing. You think the regulatory environment makes that too risky. Sirius thinks you're overcautious. You think Sirius is insufficiently cautious. Neither of you has moved." He paused. "It's the same argument. You just like having it." A silence. "He's too observant," Sirius told Ragnock. "He always has been," Ragnock said. Sirius refilled his glass. "How's school, really?" "Not the letters, the real version." Harry thought about it. "The classes are fine. Most of them are below where I am, but the exceptions are worth the gaps. McGonagall is genuinely exceptional. Flitwick too." He paused. "I had a real conversation with Dumbledore in November. Both of them went still in the particular way of people who were braced for something. It was honest," Harry said. "More honest than I expected." He acknowledged what he did. He didn't justify it past a certain point. He picked up his glass. "He's still going to fight the legal case. His lawyer will find every procedural argument available. But I think he knows he's lost the moral frame of it." "He'll lose the hearing in January," Ragnock said. "Yes," Harry said. "And then what happens to him?" The question sat on the table. "He loses the chief warlock position," Ragnock said. "Certainly. The financial penalties will be significant. The cloak and any remaining physical items from the vaults will be returned." He paused. "Whether the Board of Governors moves on the headmaster position depends on politics I can influence but not control." "I don't want him removed as headmaster," Harry said. Sirius looked at him. "Harry, I mean it. He's still the best defense against what's coming. His people at the school, his relationships with the staff, the structures he built, those are worth more than the satisfaction of removing him." He looked at Ragnock. "We get the financial restitution, we get the legal record corrected, and we leave him in the position where he can still be useful. On our terms, not his." Ragnock looked at him for a long moment. Then, very slowly, he nodded. Sirius looked at Harry with that complicated expression he sometimes got, the one that was looking for James and finding something else. "When did you get so, I don't know, strategic?" "Around age 6, Harry said. "You were there. I thought you were just playing chess." "I was playing chess," Harry said. "I was also learning strategy." Sirius laughed, the real laugh, the one that was fully present, without the Azkaban shadow in it. That shadow was still there, Harry knew. It would probably always be there in some form. But it was smaller now and the laugh was bigger than it, which was the direction things needed to go. "To the family," Sirius said, raising his glass. Harry raised his. He looked at Ragnock, who was holding his own glass with the careful dignity of someone who did not make toasts lightly. "To the family," Harry said. "The family," Ragnock said, and his voice carried the word like it was something that had been waiting in him for a long time and had just found its proper use. Outside, winter dark settled over Diagon Alley. Inside the small room above the leaky cauldron, 3 people who had been assembled by necessity and stayed by choice ate a good meal and argued about investments and talked about James and Lily and laughed about things that weren't sad, and Harry Potter, who had crawled into Gringotts 10 years ago with bloody hands and no plan except forward, sat at the center of it and was entirely, solidly himself. The January hearing was coming. Voldemort was still out there, diminished and furious and looking for a way back. The wizarding world was watching him, building legends he hadn't written. He was ready for all of it. Chapter 5, The Reckoning. January arrived like it meant something. The hearing was set for the 23rd, a Thursday, and the week leading up to it had a particular quality that Harry recognized from the days before Quidditch matches, a kind of atmospheric pressure, the world tightening around a specific point in time. The prophet ran something about it every day. The Wizengamot was the oldest and most powerful magical legislative body in Britain, and it rarely sat in public session, but this hearing had been open to observers, which was Ragnarok's doing. He had filed a request citing the public interest provisions of the 1820 Transparency Charter 6 months ago, quietly, precisely, the way he filed everything. Dumbledore had not opposed the request. That, Harry thought, was interesting. He wrote it in his letter to Ragnarok on Sunday evening. He didn't fight the public session. Why? The response came Tuesday morning, fast even for Gringotts courier, because he intends to be seen being accountable. He will take responsibility in a public forum and use that act of responsibility to preserve what he can. He is not surrendering. He is choosing his ground. Harry read it twice and then wrote back, then we need to make sure the ground he's chosen doesn't give him what he's looking for. See you Thursday. McGonagall gave him the Thursday off without requiring an explanation, which he found both useful and informative about where her private loyalties were currently sitting. He arrived at the Ministry of Magic at 8 in the morning. The atrium was already busy, ministry workers flowing through, the golden fountain catching the overhead light, the general controlled chaos of a government institution doing its morning. Harry moved through it the way he'd learned to move through Gringotts, with the calm of someone who belonged everywhere and was surprised by nothing, and took the lift down to the Wizengamot chambers on level 10. Ragnarok was already there, in the corridor outside the main chamber with Goldthorn and 2 junior legal staff whose names Harry knew from correspondence. Sirius was there too, in robes that fit properly now, his face carrying the weight it always carried but steadily, without the hollow quality of early Azkaban. He'd been attending hearings and meetings for 5 years, rebuilding the structures of a life that had been interrupted, and he was good at it in the way that people who have lost things are sometimes good at fighting to get them back. Narcissa Malfoy was there. Harry had known she would be. She was a formal party to the case, the diverted black inheritance directly affecting her claim on the estate, but seeing her in person was different from the file Ragnarok kept. She was tall, pale, with the particular composure of someone who had learned very young that composure was the only reliable weapon. She looked at Harry when he approached, and something happened in her face that was not quite recognition, because she had never met him, but something adjacent, the look of someone seeing a thing they'd been told about and finding it more specific than expected. Lord Potter Black, she said. The title was correct. He held both airships, formally, as of his 11th birthday and the estate's legal recognition, but very few people had used it yet, and hearing it in person, in the corridor outside the Wizengamot, had a different weight than reading it on a document. Lady Malfoy, Harry said. Thank you for your testimony. Her eyes were the pale grey of the Black family line, and they were considerably sharper than her measured expression. The Black estate was my inheritance too, she said. I'm not doing you a favor. I'm recovering what was taken from me. I know, Harry said. The reasons don't change the outcome. She looked at him for a moment longer. You're nothing like what I expected, she said. It was a statement, not a compliment and not a criticism. People keep saying that, Harry said. Something moved at the corner of her mouth. Your grandmother Doria would have liked you, she said. She had no patience for theater either. I know, Harry said. I read about her. Narcissa looked at him with those sharp grey eyes and then looked away, and the brief moment of connection closed back into formality, and that was fine. This was a legal alliance, not a friendship, and they both understood that. Ragnarok appeared at Harry's elbow. Ready? Yes, Harry said. Remember, I know. Harry had been briefed extensively. He knew exactly what his role was today. He was not there to perform anger or grief or triumph. He was there as Lord Potterblack, formal claimant, whose legal team would present the case, and who would speak only when the Wizengamot requested it directly. "I know," he said again, because the look on Ragnarok's face suggested he needed to hear it confirmed. Ragnar held his gaze for a moment. Then he put his hand briefly on Harry's shoulder, an old gesture, worn smooth by years of repetition, and let go. "Go in," he said. The Wizengamot chamber was built to be impressive and succeeded without effort. Stone tiers in a circle, rising on every side, the members in their plum-colored robes already seated in 2/3 of the available positions. The public gallery above was packed. Harry could feel the collected attention of several hundred people like a physical pressure when he walked in. He took his seat at the claimant's table without looking up at the gallery, without scanning the faces of the Wizengamot members, without doing anything except sitting down and folding his hands on the table in front of him. Dumbledore was at the respondents' table across the chamber floor with his lawyer and 2 junior staff. He looked tired in a way that was genuine rather than performed. He was wearing deep blue robes, not the spectacular ones he wore for ceremony, something quieter. He looked at Harry when Harry came in, and Harry met his look for exactly 1 second and then returned his attention to the chamber. Amelia Bones presided from the Chief Warlock's seat, acting Chief Warlock, pending the hearing's outcome. She had the kind of authority that didn't raise its voice because it didn't need to. She called the session to order, and the chamber went silent with the particular efficiency of a room full of people who have been waiting for something. Goldthorn presented first. Harry had heard the case explained many times by now, but hearing it delivered in the Wizengamot chamber, in the formal register of a legal proceeding, was different. Goldthorn was a precise speaker with the Goblin's gift for assembling facts into structures that left no gaps. She went through the vault drainage chronologically, the first withdrawal, 7 years before Harry's birth, the gradual escalation, the false custodial documentation, and each point landed in the chamber with the weight of something incontestable. The documents were projected by ministry spell onto the chamber's central display surface, large enough for everyone to read the figures clearly. Harry watched the chamber as she spoke. The Wizengamot members had prepared faces. The public nature of the session meant everyone was performing something, composure or concern or careful neutrality. He could identify, from the pre-hearing briefing Goldthorn had given him, which members were politically aligned with Dumbledore, which were hostile, and which were genuinely undecided. The undecided ones were the interesting ones. They were listening with a specific quality of attention, not hostile, not sympathetic, but actually taking in information, which was the best you could ask. The Black Estate section landed harder. The fraudulent restriction order, the closed investigation cited as a live one, serious as imprisonment, and the role the asset freeze had played in preventing any legal review. Several members in the tiers shifted when Goldthorn read that section. One older witch in the 3rd row, whose name Harry had been told was Griselda Marchbanks and who had been on the Wizengamot for 60 years, made a brief, sharp sound that wasn't quite a word. Then the cloak. Goldthorn read the vault transfer record in full, including the destination address. Including the fact that it had been in Dumbledore's private quarters at Hogwarts for 10 years. The chamber was very quiet when she finished. Dumbledore's lawyer stood and made procedural objections that were technically sound and practically irrelevant, because the documents were Gringotts sealed and the seal was the legal equivalent of an affidavit from a god. Bones heard each objection and disposed of it in the way that Amelia Bones disposed of things, which was cleanly and with minimal ceremony. The documents stood. Then Dumbledore spoke. He stood and he spoke without notes, and it was the best version of what Dumbledore was, the clarity of a brilliant mind that had lived fully in the world and understood it at a level that most people didn't reach. He acknowledged the facts. He did not deny a single document. He said what he had told Harry in the Hogwarts office, that he had believed he was managing resources for a necessary purpose, that the greater good demanded difficult choices, that the war against Voldemort had required structures and funding that could not always be obtained through conventional channels, and he said it with the conviction of someone who had spent 60 years believing it. He was compelling. Harry could see it working on the undecided members, could see the human response to a great man standing up and being honest about his mistakes in the context of a life of genuine service. He let it finish. Then Bones said, "Lord Potterblack, the Wizengamot recognizes your right to address this chamber if you choose." Harry stood. The gallery above was completely silent. The chamber was completely silent. He was 12 years old, standing at a claimant's table in the oldest legal institution in magical Britain, and he took a moment, not a long one, not theatrical, just a breath and a settle into himself. "I want to be clear," he said, "about what this case is and what it isn't." His voice carried in the chamber naturally, without him needing to project. "It isn't about Professor Dumbledore's service to the magical world. That service is real and it matters. It isn't about whether his intentions were good. I believe they were." He paused. "It's about a question that every institution in this chamber is built to answer. When someone decides that their judgment justifies taking what belongs to someone else, when someone decides they know better than the people whose lives they're changing, who corrects that? What stops it?" He let the question sit. "The answer is supposed to be the law," he said. "The ledger. The documented record that can't be changed after the fact to fit whoever is writing the history." He looked at the chamber. "My parents trusted Albus Dumbledore. He took money from their vaults while they were alive and never told them. He took an heirloom from my vault that belonged to my family's bloodline for centuries. He signed a document that sent my godfather to prison without a trial." He paused. "Not because he's evil. Because he was certain he was right. Because he had decided that his understanding of the greater good superseded the rights of specific people." He looked at Dumbledore directly. "The greater good argument doesn't stop being dangerous when the person making it is good," Harry said. "It gets more dangerous. Because then no one questions it. Because the man making the argument is someone everyone trusts." He looked back at the chamber. "I'm not asking you to punish him. I'm asking you to correct the record. Return what was taken. And establish, formally, that no one, regardless of their service, their reputation, or their certainty, has the authority to manage another person's life and legacy without their knowledge or consent." He sat down. The chamber was still for a moment. Then the sound came back gradually, the shuffle and murmur of several hundred people collectively processing something. Bones called for a brief recess. In the corridor, Sirius leaned against the stone wall beside Harry and said nothing for 30 seconds. Then, "Your mother gave a speech like that once. 6th year. About house elf rights, of all things. Dumbledore looked at her exactly the same way he just looked at you." "What way?" Harry said. "Like someone watching a fire they started get bigger than they planned," Sirius said. Ragnarok came out of the chamber behind them, walking with the measured pace of someone who was satisfied but keeping it internal. He stopped next to Harry. Said nothing. "Well?" Harry said. "Marchbanks is going to vote for full restitution," Ragnarok said. "I can read Wizengamot members, I've been doing it for a century. She decided in the first 5 minutes. The undecided block is moving toward partial restitution with penalties. That's sufficient." He paused. "The Chief Warlock question will be voted separately. I expect it to go the same direction. And the headmaster position?" "Not today," Ragnarok said. "I spoke to 2 board members last week. They are watching and waiting. If Dumbledore steps back from the Chief Warlock role and pays the restitution without extended legal resistance, I believe they will let the headmaster position stand." He looked at Harry. "Is that still what you want?" "Yes," Harry said. Narcissa appeared from farther down the corridor, walking toward them with her lawyer. She stopped near Sirius, who looked at her with the complicated expression of someone regarding a cousin who had made different choices and who was now, for reasons of mutual interest, on the same side. The Black family was a lot of things, Harry had read, but it was nothing if not complicated. "Well delivered," Narcissa told Harry. She said it the way she said most things, precisely, without unnecessary warmth. A fact offered. "Thank you," Harry said. She looked at Sirius. A pause that carried 10 years in it. Sirius. Sissy, Sirius said. His voice was careful. Another pause. Then, Lucius is going to be furious that I testified today, she said. It came out with an inflection that suggested this was not as troubling to her as it might once have been. He'll say I destabilized our political position. Did you? Sirius said. I secured our inheritance, she said crisply. What Lucius considers politically destabilizing is his problem. She looked at Harry again, and that brief, precise look passed between them, not warmth, but recognition, and maybe the early seed of something that would become useful. The black seat on the Wisengamot, she said. Harry looked at her. It's been vacant since your grandmother Doria died, Narcissa said. You hold the heirship. When you're 17, it's yours. She paused. You should know that before someone else tells you in a way that makes it sound like a burden rather than what it is. What is it? Harry said. Power, Narcissa said simply. Actual power, not the kind that depends on whether someone gives it to you. She turned to leave and then paused. The Malfoy seat, she said, almost to herself. Lucius holds it now. But seats held by people who have made certain choices become available eventually. She walked away. Harry watched her go. She's thinking 5 moves ahead, he said. She always has been, Sirius said. Even when we were children. She was the one at the chess board before the rest of us understood there was a game. The vote came down at 2 in the afternoon. Full restitution of all withdrawn funds from the Potter primary vault, with interest calculated from the date of each withdrawal. The Black Estate restriction order formally struck from ministry records. The invisibility cloak to be returned by the end of the month. Financial penalties assessed under the Wisengamot's fraud jurisdiction, totaling 40,000 galleons over 5 years. The Chief Warlock vote, 37 to 16, Dumbledore to vacate the position pending a 6-month review period. Not a permanent removal, a formal review, meaning if he met the standards of conduct requirements during that period, the position could be reinstated. It was a political compromise and everyone in the room knew it. It was also enough. Dumbledore stood when the vote was read. He looked at the chamber with the expression of someone who had seen many things and was seeing this one clearly. He said, in a voice that carried without effort, I accept the Wisengamot's decision and I will meet all its terms. He paused. I have a great deal left to do. I intend to do it. Then he looked directly at Harry. And Harry looked back. It lasted 3 seconds and contained more than 3 seconds worth of things, the acknowledgement, on both sides, of what this had been. The beginning of something neither of them had fully mapped yet. Not friendship, not enmity. Something that didn't have an easy name, between 2 people who were going to be in each other's orbits for a long time and knew it. Harry nodded. Once. Dumbledore looked back at the chamber. He was back at Hogwarts by dinner. Ron had been, based on the stack of increasingly urgent chess-related notes waiting on his pillow, concerned. Harry read them in order and was briefly amused by the escalation. He went down to the common room where Ron and Hermione were at a table by the window, and sat down, and Ron immediately said, well, in the manner of someone who had been waiting for hours and was very ready to stop. Restitution granted, Harry said. Chief Warlock position under review. Cloak back by end of month. Brilliant, Ron said, with the simple satisfaction of someone who had been following the case closely enough to know what the outcomes meant but who expressed his opinions with less architecture than Harry. Hermione looked at him with the specific focus she got when she was sorting through the full implications of something. How was it, she said. Not what happened, how was it? Clear, Harry said, after a moment. It was clear. Every piece was what it was. The documents were correct, the process ran correctly, the outcome was what the evidence supported. He paused. That doesn't happen as often as it should. No, Hermione agreed quietly. But when it does, he looked at the window. The evening was cold and dark, the grounds invisible past the glass, just the reflection of the common room. When it does, it's worth more than you can explain to someone who hasn't seen it. Luna appeared, as she sometimes did, from the direction of the portrait hole with the serene non-urgency of someone who moved through the castle on her own schedule. She was carrying the current issue of the Quibbler, which naturally had the hearing on the front page. Her father had been in the gallery, Harry had seen him. She set it on the table in front of Harry. The Reckoning, Lord Potterblack speaks, Wisengamot acts. Below it, a photograph of Harry in the chamber, standing at the claimant's table. He looked, in the photograph, like himself, which was either reassuring or strange, he hadn't decided. "Dad says you gave the best speech he's heard in that chamber in 30 years, Luna said, sitting down. He cried a little. Xenophilius Lovegood cried. Ron said. He's more emotional than he seems, Luna said. He hides it behind the Raxpert's coverage. She tilted her head at Harry. How do you feel? Harry looked at the photograph of himself. 12 years old, standing in a chamber full of adults, saying the thing that needed to be said. He thought about the morning of November 1st, 1981, which he didn't remember but knew in every other way, the photographs and documents and Ragnarok's account and the clean white marble of the Gringotts steps with the small handprints on them. Fine, he said. And then, because Luna asked direct questions and deserved direct answers, good. I feel good. You should, she said simply, and opened her magazine. Spring came in sideways, wet and argumentative, the way English spring usually did. The legal aftermath of the January hearing ran its course through February and March. The galleons transferred from Dumbledore's accounts to the Potter Estate Fund under ministry supervision, the official record in the Black family case annotated with the formal correction, the vault restriction order struck and filed under judicial error, politically motivated, 1979. That specific filing classification had been Amelia Bone's choice and Harry had appreciated the precision of it. The invisibility cloak arrived at the start of February. It came via ministry official courier, formally packaged, with a ministry receipt that was technically a record of surrender of property. Harry opened the package in the dormitory with Ron and Hermione present because they'd asked to see it and he didn't have any reason not to. He lifted it out. It was extraordinary. Not in a showy way, not glittering or elaborate or decorated. It was simple, silver gray, falling through his hands with a weightlessness that real fabric didn't have, and when he draped it over his arm the arm disappeared, cleanly and completely, no shimmer, no telltale distortion. A true heirloom cloak, the Peveril line, and the magic in it was old enough that it had a quality he recognized from the deepest levels of Gringotts, the magic that was so settled in something it had become part of its nature. Ron's eyes went very wide. Hermione put her hand through the space where Harry's arm had been with the expression of someone experiencing an interesting violation of expected reality. That's not an ordinary invisibility cloak, Hermione said. No, Harry said. He looked at the fabric folded over what remained of his visible arm. It's the original. There's no disillusionment involved. It's not hiding my arm. It's making the light go around me. Completely differently. The Deathly Hallows, Hermione said quietly. One of them. Ron was looking at the empty air where Harry's arm wasn't with the expression of someone whose mental model of the world was being gently rearranged. Right, he said. Right. And the other two are, somewhere, Harry said. He let the cloak fall and his arm reappeared. One thing at a time. Quirrell didn't return to Hogwarts. The official announcement in March was that he had resigned for health reasons. The unofficial story, which circulated in fragments through the Hogwarts rumor network and eventually reached a more coherent version via Luna, whose father had sources everywhere, was that Quirrell had been found in a village in Albania in February in a state of considerable distress, with no memory of the past year and a great deal of confusion about why he was there. He was in a St. Mungo's ward now, recovering slowly. Whatever had been using him had abandoned him when the stone was moved. Which meant it was looking for something else. Harry sat with this information on a Sunday afternoon in March on the grounds by the lake, with the early spring attempting something optimistic overhead, and turned it over. Voldemort had been weakened for a decade, working from the remnant of his power, using possessed hosts because he had no body of his own. He'd been in the Albanian forests, moving between hosts, surviving. The stone would have given him a body, a proper anchor. Without it, he was back to the same diminished state. But diminished was not gone. "You're thinking about him," Hermione said. She was beside him with a textbook, because Hermione was almost always with a textbook when sitting outside, apparently having decided that the value of fresh air should be maximized by pairing it with study. "Voldemort," Harry said. "Not a question. You do the thing where your face goes still and you look at the middle distance," she said. "I've learned to recognize it." "That's a concerning diagnostic skill," Harry said. "You've been doing it since January," she said. "Since the hearing. Like you finished one thing and now you're looking at the next one." He looked at the lake. A squid arm was visible briefly, gray-green, before disappearing under the surface. "He's going to keep trying," Harry said. "He doesn't stop. He's been trying to get back to full power for a decade and the stone was the closest he'd gotten. Without it," he paused. "He'll find another way. There are other objects, other methods. The Philosopher's Stone was one path. There are others. And you're going to be in the middle of it," Hermione said. It wasn't a complaint or an alarm. Just a statement of what she understood to be true. "Yes," Harry said. She was quiet for a moment, reading. "Then, when you face him, actually face him, when it comes to that, what do you think it'll look like?" "I don't know," Harry said honestly. "The prophecy says something about neither can live while the other survives. Dumbledore told me about it in February." He'd had a second conversation with Dumbledore, quieter than the first, after the hearing, when the most combative things between them had been resolved and what remained was more complicated. But prophecies are not instructions. They're descriptions of a possible outcome shaped by the choices of the people in them. He paused. "I'm not going to die because a prophecy says I might." "No," Hermione said. "You're not." She said it the way she said things she had thought through and decided about, not with hope but with the conviction of someone who had looked at the evidence and reached a conclusion. Harry found it more reassuring than comfort would have been. The first Hogsmeade visit of the year brought Sirius. Not in the village. He met Harry at the edge of the grounds, where the Hogwarts protections thinned and the path to Hogsmeade began, in the early morning before the other students were moving. He had an owl with him, a large grey one, and a package, and the slightly overdressed quality of someone who had put thought into a casual appearance. "Walk with me," Sirius said. They walked down the path toward Hogsmeade in the early April morning with the cold still in the air but something warming underneath it, the first real suggestion that the season was changing. "The estate is formally restored," Sirius said. "You probably know that already. Ragnarok confirmed it last week." "The house in Godric's Hollow," Sirius paused. He'd been in this conversation in his head for a while, Harry could tell. "I went to see it. The ruins. I hadn't been back since that night." He was looking at the path ahead. "I thought it would be worse. It was bad. But it was also," he looked for the word. "There was something still alive in it. In the land. The magic doesn't leave just because the house is gone." Harry said nothing, listening. "I want to rebuild it," Sirius said. "If you want. I'm not asking you to make it home, or to feel anything particular about it. I just think it should exist again." He paused. "Your parents built that house. It should be a house." Harry thought about the photographs. The wind chimes Lily had hung. James complaining and then not complaining. The three of them in the garden in the summer, all of them alive and not knowing what was coming. "Yes," Harry said. "Rebuild it." Sirius exhaled. "Right," he said. "Good. He handed Harry the package, the owl having been a courier, apparently, not a companion. From Ragnarok. He said to give it to you in person. Harry opened it on the path. Inside was a small box, and inside the box was a ring. The Potter family signet, black stone in a gold setting with the family crest worked into the surface, the stag at the center that Harry recognized from a dozen documents and seals. The official heirship ring, which he was entitled to wear as Lord Potterblack. It had been in the vault, documented in the audit, returned with the other property. He held it in his palm. It was heavier than he'd expected. Old gold, old magic, the kind that had been passed down so many times it had become something more than its materials. Your father wore that, Sirius said quietly. Harry put it on. It fit, which shouldn't have surprised him given goblin craftsmanship, but did slightly anyway. He held his hand up and looked at it in the morning light. The stag in the stone caught the light and held it. Thank you, he said to Sirius. Sirius looked at his hand. You know, he said, and his voice had something rough in it, I spent 4 years in Azkaban thinking about that night. What I could have done. What I should have done. Beating myself up about Pettigrew, about the secret keeper switch, about everything. He shook his head. And then I get out and Ragnarok brings me to a training room and there's this small person with a sword, absolutely focused, completely himself. And all that stuff I was carrying just, he made a gesture. Changed shape. Not gone. But different. Harry looked at him. Because I was fine. Because you were more than fine, Sirius said. You were, he stopped. Started again. James wanted you to be happy. Not successful, not powerful, not famous. Happy. That was the thing he said once when we were talking about it, what do you want for your kid someday, and he said happy. Anne, he looked at Harry. I think you are. Harry thought about it. The question deserved its proper answer rather than a quick one. The morning was quiet around them. The ground spread behind them toward the castle and the path fell away toward Hogsmeade ahead. Somewhere up there Ron was probably still asleep and Hermione was probably already awake and Luna was probably talking to a portrait about something interesting and Ragnarok was at his desk reading a ledger and the world was doing the 1,000 things it did simultaneously regardless of whether anyone was paying attention to it. Yes, Harry said. I think I am. June brought exams and summer heat and the thing Harry had been expecting since January. He felt it first as a shift in the magic of the castle, that deep, old attention that the stones carried, something unsettled, something that moved through the Hogwarts wards the way a cold current moves through warm water. He'd felt something similar in October, when Quirrell's doubled signature was at its strongest. This was different. Not in the castle. Near it. He told Hermione and Ron on a Tuesday evening in the library, when the studying had hit a natural pause and the library was quiet enough to talk. Something's coming, he said. They both looked at him. Not Quirrell. Something new. In the last week, there's been something at the edge of the wards. Moving. Testing. He paused. It's not physical. It's an essence. A magical presence without a fixed form. Hermione put her quill down. Voldemort. Testing the wards, Ron said. Looking for a way in. He doesn't have a body, Harry said. That limits what he can do directly. But he has enough power in his diminished state to influence people. If there's someone inside the wards who is already sympathetic, he paused. A host, Hermione said. Or someone he can work through without full possession, Harry said. Partial influence. Nudges. It's harder to detect and harder to attribute. They were all quiet for a moment. What do we do? Ron said. We watch, Harry said. We pay attention to behavior changes in people around us, particularly people with access to things Voldemort would want, access to the wards, access to restricted areas, access to me. He looked at them. And we don't panic. Panic is noise. He feeds on it. Dumbledore should know, Hermione said. He already does, Harry said. I told him this morning. Ron looked at him. You went to Dumbledore. Yes. First. Ron said, with the slightly surprised expression of someone revising a model. He knows the castle's wards better than anyone alive, Harry said simply. When it's his area of expertise, I use it. He paused. Being at odds with someone doesn't mean you can't use each other correctly. This sat on the table for a moment. That's very, Ron started. Don't say grown up, Harry said. I was going to say goblin, Ron said. Harry looked at him. That's a compliment. I know, Ron said. I've been paying attention. The thing at the edge of the wards materialized properly on a Saturday in late June, a week before the end of term. Harry was on the Quidditch pitch, alone, flying, the late June evening golden and warm, when he felt it focus. Not testing anymore. Directing. He felt it orient toward him with the specific quality of a thing that had been waiting for a moment and had found it. He landed. Stood in the middle of the pitch in the long evening light and let his own magic settle, not suppressing it, not raising it against anything, just letting it find its natural level, which was higher than most people's natural level and had been since the night a killing curse had failed to kill him and something in the rebound had etched itself permanently into his magical core. I know you're there, he said aloud. The air changed. It was subtle, a density, a cold line in the warm evening, the particular pressure of a very powerful magical entity that had no body and was therefore present entirely through the force of its will. Harry Potter. The voice was not sound. It arrived differently, inside rather than outside, the way a thought arrives, except from elsewhere. You have been very busy. You are not what I expected. Everyone says that, Harry said. Aloud, for his own benefit. Speaking aloud helped him stay grounded. The boy who crawled into a goblin bank. A pause. Something that was not quite amusement. I have been watching you for some time. I know, Harry said. Since October. You tested the wards 4 times before tonight. A pause. The temperature dropped 2 degrees. You are not afraid of me. I'm not afraid of your current form, Harry said. You're an essence without a body. You have will and power but no physical anchor. What you can do to me right now is limited. He paused. What I find interesting is why you're here at all, without a host, without a plan. You're not ready to act. So this is an assessment. The cold line in the air was very still. I'll tell you what you'll find, Harry said. I'm not the boy you expected. I'm not frightened of my own power. I'm not waiting for someone else's permission or someone else's plan. I know what I am and I know what's coming and I've had 12 years to prepare for it. He looked at the empty air. You should know that. The prophecy says neither can live while the other survives. Yes, Harry said. It does. He looked at the empty space. But it doesn't say how. It doesn't say on whose terms. And it doesn't say I lose. The cold line stretched, evaluating. And underneath the evaluation, something else, not fear, exactly, something adjacent to respect that was unwilling and involuntary and communicating more clearly than anything the formless presence had said. You are very like your mother. I know, Harry said. She said something similar to me once. Just before the end. Harry's hands were absolutely still at his sides. The ring caught the last of the evening light. Then you know how that kind of certainty ends, he said. The cold withdrew. Not fled, withdrew, deliberately, with the deliberation of something that had gotten what it came for and was choosing its own timing. The air warmed back to normal. The evening returned to what it had been, golden, quiet, the Quidditch pitch empty in the long summer light. Harry stood there for a moment. Then he walked back toward the castle. Dumbledore was waiting at the entrance, which meant either the castle had told him something, or Dumbledore's network of monitors was as comprehensive as Ragnarok had always suspected. He looked at Harry with those eyes that had seen everything and were still seeing new things. Was that a confrontation? Dumbledore asked. An introduction, Harry said. A mutual assessment. He paused. He's not ready to move directly. He needs a body or a sufficiently powerful conduit. He doesn't have either right now. He will eventually find both, Dumbledore said. Yes, Harry agreed. He looked at the old man in the doorway of the castle he'd built over 40 years, with the portraits and the instruments and the phoenix inside. When he does, I'll be there. You don't need to, Dumbledore started. I know I don't need to, Harry said. Not impatiently. Clearly. It's not about need. It's about what I choose. He held Dumbledore's gaze. You built your whole plan around a boy who didn't know what he was facing. That boy doesn't exist. He paused. This version goes into it with his eyes open, with his inheritance intact, with a family behind him and his own power undiminished. The outcome is better. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. The summer evening sat around them, warm and gold and indifferent to great events. Yes, Dumbledore said finally. I believe it is. The last week of term moved quickly, as last weeks do when you've stopped trying to hold on to time. Exams, which Harry moved through with the ease of someone who had been studying beyond the curriculum since he was 4, not for academic achievement but because knowledge was what Gringotts ran on and he'd absorbed the habit completely. Ron was competent and occasionally brilliant and profoundly underprepared on specific topics, which Hermione had been trying to address through the medium of surprise quizzes for 3 months with moderate success. Harry helped where asked and didn't help where not asked, which was his usual policy. The night before the train home, Harry was in the library again, alone this time, late, the way he sometimes spent the last evening of things, not because he was sentimental about endings but because last evenings had a particular quality of honesty to them that he found useful. The year laid out behind him. What it had been. He'd arrived at Hogwarts and found it manageable in a way that he hadn't been sure it would be. He'd found people who were worth the effort of knowing, Ron, Hermione, Luna, each of them different and each of them clear-eyed in their different ways. He'd sat in the Wizengamot and said the thing that needed saying. He'd stood in Dumbledore's office and spoken honestly to someone who had complicated his existence. He'd stood on a Quidditch pitch and looked Voldemort in the eye and neither blinked nor broke. And underneath all of it, what he'd always known but knew more fully now, a year into the world the rest of the wizarding world lived in, was that who he was had been built in a bank. In the company of ledgers and legal documents and a 300-year-old goblin who had picked him up from a marble floor and decided, against every expectation of what a goblin director did, that here was something worth protecting. He wrote a letter. Not to Ragnarok, not tonight, he'd see Ragnarok in 2 days. Not to Sirius. He wrote it to the parents he knew from photographs and second-hand accounts and a handmade book from the Gringotts archive, which was in many ways more of them than most people got of their parents and in another way was the specific shape of an absence. He wrote it because the year had been the year it was and they should have seen it. He wrote it knowing he would never send it. He finished it, folded it, put it in the front of his notebook where the photograph of James and Sirius at the Hogwarts gates had lived for most of the year. Then he closed the notebook and packed it in his bag and walked back through the corridors of the castle that had, as Sirius promised, decided it liked him. The stones hummed under his feet, old and warm, the deep memory of the building running alongside him as he walked. King's Cross, September of the previous year, he'd come through the barrier alone and met the platform and the train and the noise of it. This time he came through with Ron, who had gotten there early and waited, and Hermione, who arrived precisely 3 minutes after them with her parents, 2 pleasant people who looked at Harry with the careful interest of people who had heard a great deal about someone and were now forming their own opinion. Hermione talks about you constantly, her father said pleasantly. Dad, Hermione said. You and Ron, her father clarified, with the innocent air of someone making it better and not quite managing it. Mum and Dad, this is Harry, Hermione said. Harry, this is my actual worst nightmare. Harry shook her father's hand. She's brilliant, he told them. The best in every class that matters. Hermione's mother gave him the specific look that parents give people who say the correct things about their children. You're very welcome in our home this summer, she said. Hermione's mentioned, Mom, she mentioned wanting to show you the Muggle world properly, her mother said. Not that she ever stops reading about the magical one, but, Harry looked at Hermione, who looked like she was considering whether to die of embarrassment as an alternative to continuing this conversation. I'd like that, Harry said simply. Luna appeared from somewhere, she always appeared from somewhere, the geography of her arrivals was its own mystery, and hugged Harry once, briefly, and said, Good year, with the satisfied tone of someone who had been keeping a score internally and was pleased with the total. Good year, Harry agreed. She stepped back and looked at him with those clear, slightly sideways eyes. The hard parts are still coming, she said. Not ominous. Just honest, the way Luna was always honest. I know, Harry said. You'll manage them the same way you managed this one, she said. By being exactly who you are and not making it any more complicated than it needs to be. She tilted her head. Most people make things more complicated than they need to be. I've noticed. It's the Raxperts, she said, with complete seriousness, and walked away. Ron appeared at Harry's shoulder. Does she mean that? Ron said. The Raxpert thing? I honestly don't know, Harry said. But her conclusions are usually right regardless of her methodology. The train whistled. The platform moved around them in the way platforms move, directed, purposeful, everyone heading somewhere with the particular energy of a journey beginning. Harry found a compartment and stowed his trunk and sat by the window as the train pulled out of the station and London began its slow withdrawal behind the glass. He thought about next year. The things he'd learned about what Voldemort would need, what paths remained available to him, what structures were still in place in the wizarding world that needed attention. The Wizengamot seat. The politics. The ongoing restitution process. Dumbledore's 6-month review period. Sirius rebuilding the house in Godric's Hollow. The philosopher's stone moved somewhere safer. The cloak on his trunk. He thought about the night he couldn't remember, the rubble and the cold and the pulling compass of something instinctual that had pointed him toward marble steps and bronze doors and a 300-year-old goblin who had picked him up and not put him down. He put his hand flat against the train window, watching the last of London give way to countryside. The Potter ring caught the light. The countryside opened up ahead of the train, green and wide and full of summer, the world enormous and available, and Harry Potter, 12 years old, lord of 2 ancient houses, raised by ledgers and legal texts and the most honest institution in magical Britain, pressed his hand against the glass and looked forward at all of it without fear. There was a great deal still to do. He was ready.